The first time we went to a gym, we worked with a personal trainer. They asked what our goal was, which was of course to get shredded. So we replied that we wanted to gain some muscle while losing fat. The trainer stepped back and said, "Yeah, that's not gonna happen. You can't lose weight and gain muscle at the same time." What a bummer. But how many times have you heard that from someone? It's impossible to build muscle and lose fat at the same time. Well, we have good news for you. Yes, you can, and this video is going to show you how you can run a successful body recomposition. And it's actually not that hard. In fact, there's just 3 key points to follow, so here we go. In the past, the term body recomposition was rarely ever mentioned. It refers to the process of losing fat and gaining muscle at the same time, and has been considered the holy grail of training. However, all the serious lifters knew this was just a pipe dream. To see progress, you either trained for fat loss or you trained for muscle. If you wanted to gain muscle without getting fat, you had to do it in cycles by partaking in multiple bulks and cuts. Everyone knew that. This was mainly believed since fat loss is a catabolic process, while building muscle is an anabolic one. Trying to do both at once would cause something termed metabolic antagonism, resulting in a stalemate. What's crazy is that this was the primary school of thought up until not that long ago. In fact, studies researching body recomposition don't even start to become a real thing until around 2020. If anything, a body recomposition was believed to only be possible for 2 groups of people. The first group are newbies. The basic explanation was that these individuals were so new to the stimuli of exercise, their bodies had stronger reactions and thus was able to have a successful body recomposition. However, as you train more, your body needs more specific stimuli to grow, and the response occurs to a smaller and smaller degree. And it goes by quick. Once you've been lifting for just a year, you can say bye-bye recomps. The second group are those with a high percentage of body fat. The theory behind this is that their body has so much excess fat, there's plenty of energy readily available. Even if they're in a deficit, the body can still access calories from the excessive stored fat. However, as their body fat percentage lowers, their calories are less accessible, meaning your body won't have the energy to build muscle in a caloric deficit. So again, the leaner you become, the harder it gets to run a successful recomposition. So was this line of thinking completely wrong? Well, actually, they were kind of right. When it comes to these 2 groups of people, both lifting newbies and those with high body fat percentages, they really will be more likely to see better results in their recomposition. Where the error in the thinking lies is with the idea that the other groups of people can't perform successful recomposition as well. This includes those that have a lower body fat percentage and those who have been training for longer periods of time. Now, this is where our knowledge of exercise science and body recomposition has recently grown. Later, there's been an influx of studies which show that these recompositions are not only possible, but possible for virtually everyone, even elite athletes. This means you too can run a successful recomposition and build muscle and lose fat at the same time, if you follow the guidelines we're going to give you. So get ready, because a lot of these studies are relatively new, like within just the past few years, meaning this might be the first time you've heard these conclusions. Alright, here we go. And we want you to pay special attention to this next part. We hope you're paying attention to everything, but we really want you to pay attention to this upcoming info, since we're now going to tell you what factors will determine a successful body recomposition. We're going to walk through some actual studies, assess their outcomes, and then apply the information to our training. Let's start with nutrition. Out of all the variables that will go into your recomposition, perhaps the most important aspect is going to be your nutrition. We don't say that lightly, as everything is of utmost importance. However, when we look at all the studies on successful recomps, nutrition is addressed consistently, specifically your protein intake. Upping your protein intake is probably the most important practice you'll need to adopt to support your recomposition. In fact, it seems to be the key. To see how effective it is, let's look at a study from Dr. Jose Antonio of ISSN that was performed in 2015. In it, 48 resistance-trained men and women with an average of 2.4 years of training followed an 8-week progressive program using a 5-day split. So right off the bat, you can see these weren't lifting novices. These 48 individuals were then put into 2 different groups, which differed only by one main variable: their protein intake. We should note they also increased their caloric intake, but we can tell you now that this did not lead to what you think it did. So the normal protein group was supposed to eat 1.8 grams per kilogram of body weight, but they actually ended up eating more protein than instructed, 2.3 grams per kilogram. As far as calories, they ate 29.3 calories per kilogram of body weight. For example, a 100 kilogram or 220 pound person ate 2,930 calories. Now, the high protein group ate a whopping 3.4 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight, which resulted in 35.7 calories per kilo of body weight. So in this group, a 100 kilogram person would have eaten 3,570 calories. And what happened after the 8 weeks of training was surprising. First, both groups saw a successful recomposition. Further, both gained on average 1.5 kilograms of muscle. However, things differed when it came to fat loss. The high-protein group lost on average 1.6 kilograms of fat, while the normal protein group only lost 0.3 kilograms. This resulted in a greater decrease than that of the normal protein group, with a loss of 2.4% versus 0.6%. To be clear, even though the high-protein group consumed nearly 22% more calories at 35.7 per kilogram versus 29.3 per kilogram, they lost 5 times more fat than the low-protein group. This means an 80-kilogram man would still lose more weight even though they were eating an extra 500 calories a day. How is that possible? The most likely reason is due to protein's high thermal effect of food. The thermal effect of food is basically the amount of calories needed to actually digest and transport the food. As you can imagine, protein is significantly harder for your body to digest. Think steak versus rice. It's estimated that protein has a thermal effect of food of around 20 to 30%. That means if you eat 1,000 calories of protein, your body will burn 200 to 300 calories just to digest it. To further illustrate this, Dr. Antonio did another high-protein study using 4.4 grams per kilogram. Even though the individuals in the high-protein group ate 800 more calories, they did not see any gain in fat. So how does this apply to you? Well, while your protein intake seems to be the key part of your diet for recomposition, your training still matters. Eating a ton of chicken and steak will definitely get your protein up, but it's not enough on its own to significantly increase muscle mass. You know how hard you need to train to gain muscle under normal conditions? Well, when you're doing a recomposition, it's even harder. In 2016, Dr. Antonio performed yet another study using high-protein diets. These individuals ate anywhere from 2.3 to 3.2 grams per kilogram of body weight while following a resistance training program. However, unlike in his earlier study, these individuals saw no significant improvements in their body composition, even though they trained for a year. So why are we telling you about a study with no results? Well, that's because it actually has significant implications. Dr. Antonio addressed this contradicting result and noted one primary difference between the two studies. You see, the individuals in his 2015 study were put on a proper resistance training program which utilized periodization and progressive overload. Periodization is a method of altering the total volume and load you lift throughout your program to create different stimuli for greater adaptation. In other words, instead of lifting just 3 sets of 10 reps for exercises, you might also use 3 sets of 5 reps and 3 sets of 15 reps. In this study, they used 4 rep ranges to hit the muscle, including 3 sets of 5 reps, 3 sets of 8 reps, 3 sets of 10 reps, and 3 sets of 12 reps. The study also used progressive overload. Progressive overload is the principle that says to ensure consistent growth, you must constantly place a slightly larger demand on the muscle over time. In other words, you need to lift more weight, more reps, or more sets. In comparison, those in his 2016 study trained but were simply instructed to train, quote, as usual. In other words, they weren't using a well-structured training program. With that said, they still tracked their training, including their volume, and it's here that the researchers found out the likely cause for no improvement. There was no increase in total training volume. This is a crucial factor. Training volume is basically the total amount of work you perform in the weight room. This might be calculated as set volume, which measures the amount of working sets, or total volume, which is the summation of all the weight you lifted, found by the equation sets times reps times load. By not increasing their total volume, the study group essentially never increased the amount they lifted throughout the program. So they never put a greater stress on their muscles. In this condition, we shouldn't expect to see any increase in muscle mass. You see, volume is the most important variable that influences muscle growth. There have been dozens of studies that show a clear dose-response relationship with volume and muscle growth. If you want your muscles to grow, you have to increase your volume. Those in this study didn't. In fact, that's exactly what Dr. Antonio concluded in his study, saying, thus, one would speculate that without significant changes in the training stimulus, the mere provision of extra protein would likely not lead to changes in body composition. Therefore, don't forget the same principles apply for muscle growth when you're doing a recomposition. This means you must increase the volume on a weekly basis. If you don't, you'll still maintain your muscle mass, but there will be not enough stimuli for more growth. Now let's take a closer look at what the actual programs entailed. Going back to Dr. Antonio's 2015 study, we already discussed how it utilized periodization with progressive overload. More specifically, the trainees were put on a 5-day split with 5 to 8 exercises in each session. The exercises included your basics such as bench press, machine military press, dips, lat pull down, and back squats. Now let's look at another study from 2018, which saw a successful body recomposition with female physique competitors. This study used a 4-day upper-lower split for an 8-week program. This equated to 2 upper body and 2 lower body sessions each week. The upper body days used 6 exercises per session and included exercises such as barbell rows, overhead press, and assisted pull-ups. The lower body day used 5 exercises per session and included back squats, deadlifts, and hip thrusts. Further, it too used periodization training throughout the 8 weeks, using rep ranges of 3 to 5, 9 to 11, and 14 to 16. Now, this study also used HIIT, or high-intensity interval-style training. Participants completed a prescribed amount of 30-second maximum efforts with their choice of exercise, such as treadmill, cycling, etc. Starting with 4 rounds in weeks 1 and 2, they added 1 set every 2 weeks, ending by performing 7 sets on weeks 7 and 8. We want to point out that this study also looked at high protein, 2.5 grams per kilogram versus low protein of 0.9 grams per kilogram. At the end of the study, the participants in the high protein group gained 2.1 kilos of muscle versus 0.6 kilograms in the low protein group. The high protein group also lost 1.1 kilograms of fat, while the low protein group saw no decrease. What makes this study stand out was that again the participants were seasoned, trained physique competitors. This meant that not only were they experienced lifters, they also had lower body fat percentage. This completely disproves the belief that only noobs and overweight individuals are able to run a successful body recomp. Another factor that's going to affect your success is your sleep. So you need to get your Z's in. Now let's be clear, your sleep is always an important factor when you're training. Heck, sleep is an important factor if you train or not, which you'll soon see. However, the importance of sleep is multiplied when running a body recomposition. To see how much of a role sleep plays in your body composition, pay attention to this eye-opening study from 2018. In it, 41 overweight individuals were put on an 8-week calorie-restricted diet, which equaled about a 30% reduction in their baseline calories. Everything was similar, except one variable. You guessed it, their sleep. One group had a normal amount of sleep, while the other sleep was cut short, but not by that much. They probably didn't want the study to be too cruel, so the sleep restriction group simply missed out on 1 hour of sleep of their baseline, which equated to about 6.5 hours of sleep. However, what's interesting is that this was only for 5 days a week. The other 2 days they were allowed to sleep as much as they wanted, which equated to about 1 hour longer than their baseline, or 8.5 hours. This was to mimic real life and the idea of catching up on the weekend. What they found was that both groups lost the same amount of body weight, 3.2 kilograms. However, what is crazy is where the weight came from, since they didn't lose weight in the same ways. The median proportions of fat loss was 83% for normal sleep and 58% for sleep deprivation. That means that the normal sleep group showed a significantly greater ability to burn fat while they slept. On the flip side, the median proportions of lean mass loss was 17% for the normal sleep group and 39% for the sleep deprivation group. That means you could expect to burn twice as much muscle if you're sleep deprived. When put together, this means that getting normal sleep primes the body to preserve muscle and burn fat. Similar results were seen in another study where 5.5 hours of sleep opposed to 8.5 hours resulted in 55% less fat burned and 60% more muscle burned. We should note that these groups weren't involved in resistance training. However, this shows just how beneficial sleep can be. Considering that just about every other study shows sleep deprivation is associated with poor performance and composition outcomes, you should definitely be getting to bed early if we were trying to lose fat and build muscle simultaneously. After looking at the science, it seems that running a recomposition isn't terribly different from general muscle gain. The primary difference is the high amount of protein you eat and the overemphasis of progressive overload. The thing is, when we say high protein, we mean higher than normal protein intake for bodybuilders, which is already considered high. But we have some specific tips that'll benefit anyone, not just professionals and competitors. Remember that when people ate protein in the amount of 2.3 grams per kilogram of body weight, they would still have a successful recomposition. However, eating more, upwards of 3.3 grams per kilogram, produce significantly better results. Therefore, you should try to maintain as high a protein intake as possible, but try to make 2.5 grams per kilogram your minimum. This is the amount used in the study with the physique competitors. Doing so is going to take more intention on your part. Getting in this much protein can be tough, so make sure to use a high-quality protein powder to aid in your protein intake. In addition, also consider taking advantage of a pre-sleep protein shake. Not only will this increase your overall protein intake, studies show that consumption of 20 to 40 grams of casein approximately 30 minutes before sleep will improve recovery and possibly aid in greater muscle growth. The reason casein is mentioned specifically is it's slow digesting. This results in a longer, steady, heightened rate of muscle protein synthesis as opposed to whey. This protein should then be divided into 4 to 6 feedings across the day. This will ensure your body has a steady flow of amino acids to aid in muscle recovery and prevent any breakdown of muscle. Second, get your calories right. For normal weight loss, the guideline is to eat a 300 to 500 calorie deficit. However, this is when losing weight is your primary goal. When it comes to a body recomposition, prescribing calories gets a bit more nuanced. If you're able to maintain very high levels of protein, you can theoretically get away with eating more calories. Remember Dr. Antonio's study. The higher protein group ate an extra 6.3 calories per kilogram, yet still lost more weight. However, we can also anecdotally look at what happens when new trainees and overweight people do a recomposition. These groups are generally in a caloric deficit, but their body's able to still build muscle. Therefore, when you start, stay in a deficit, but toward the lower end, like 300 max. Like always, you will then need to assess your weight and composition as you move forward to see if you need to make adjustments. A quick note on tracking your progress. It's going to be tough as you'll need access to some sort of body composition testing, but this is the only way to actually tell if weight fluctuation is coming from muscle gain, fat loss, fat gain, etc. And if you do have access, be sure to use the same machine every time you test. Third, utilize a proper resistance training program. This primarily means using a program that emphasizes progressive overload by increasing your weekly training volume. In addition, the 2 studies we talked about focused on using bigger compound movements, bench press, chin-ups, squats, overhead press, etc. Make this the majority of your training. Also, don't forget that we looked at 2 successful studies that both utilized periodization. Unfortunately, as of to date, there are no studies that have compared different training methods in recomposition. For example, periodized versus non-periodized. So we can't say for sure that a periodized plan will definitely work better. However, we can say a periodized plan was successful in multiple studies. But keep in mind that running a recomposition will take time. It's a slower process, but it cuts out the need to bulk and cut. It makes it very useful for anyone who hates the yo-yoing of bulking and cutting, or if there's anyone who just really doesn't want to gain weight in bulk. Regardless of your reason, a successful body recomposition cuts out all the extra steps. It may take some time to see how your body responds and how much control you have over your protein intake. However, once you do, it's bye-bye to the endless cycle of bulking and cutting, and hello to a bigger and more shredded body simultaneously. You will never see a more significant transformation than in your first 365 days of training. Your muscles are simply primed for growth. This glorious time of unsubstantiated growth has been termed newbie gains and will be unmatched for the rest of your lifting career. But to what extent can you really expect your muscles to grow in your first year of lifting? And are there ways you can maximize your potential? We'll explain this period of awesome gains in greater detail and provide specific answers to both those questions. Why do you want to start going to the gym? It's the first question most trainers ask. But honestly, we don't even need to give you time to think, as we already know the answer: to get big. If you're like the vast majority of lifters who have given themselves this new goal in life, one of your primary reasons to even start lifting is to grow muscle. But how much can we reasonably expect to grow in 1 year? To answer that, let's first start with a short story. In 1973, a man named Casey Viator joined one of the craziest studies in sports science that we've ever seen, called the Colorado Experiment, where Arthur Jones, the inventor of Nautilus training equipment, conducted a 28-day study to prove that rapid muscle hypertrophy was possible. In it, a group of men trained every other day using a special program. This program included performing one set of 10 to 14 different exercises. Each set was done to complete failure, which is where you can't even complete even a single repetition at the end of each set. After the study, Casey had gained an astonishing 63 pounds of muscle. You heard that right. It's reported that Casey had gained 63 pounds of muscle in just 28 days. So does this mean you can expect to see those same results? Well, probably not. Depending on who you ask, this story is either a testament to dedication or a simple example of great marketing. And even if it was true, it would be a 1 in a billion experience. Still, thanks to social media and influencers, we are constantly bombarded with absolutely insane body transformations that spew out completely unrealistic numbers. Those bogus claims lead to many starting their fitness journey with the expectation that they'll be gracing the covers of fitness mags in just 365 days. If putting on muscle was as easy as putting on fat, that might be true. Unfortunately, it's not. A wise person once said, "Good things come to those who wait." Another wise person also said, "Slow and steady wins the race," and both of those quotes can be applied to building muscle. That's because building muscle is a long, slow process that takes consistency and dedication. However, if you stick with it, you'll surely be rewarded for your hard work. And luckily, 1 year is more than enough time to see some amazing results. In fact, it'll probably be your best year. To determine how much muscle we can expect to grow in 1 year for a newbie, we must first examine the rate at which muscle grows. In 2007, a large meta-study was conducted that looked over 200 studies to identify the average increase in muscle mass that occurred with differences in training variables. The study looked at individual muscles and tracked how much they grew each day. For quadriceps, the average increase seen under training was 0.11% per day, but some grew as fast as 0.26%. For biceps, the average increase was 0.20% per day, with 0.33% being the largest. Keep in mind that the studies being looked at included both trained and untrained individuals using a plethora of different variables. With that in mind, untrained and sedentary individuals will tend to have a greater response due to the novelty of the stimuli. However, even within this group of new lifters, there's still a large variety of response. The old adage, "life isn't fair," also applies to building muscle in your first year. Everyone has a different story to tell. For example, take a look at this study in 2005 that examined the difference in muscle growth in untrained subjects undergoing bicep training. This was a huge study, using 585 men and women who had not trained in at least 1 year. They were then put on a 12-week progressive overload program, which is a type of strength training that involves gradually increasing the intensity or difficulty. And the results? Well, they were mixed. On average, the trainees' biceps increased by 15 to 20% over the entire 12 weeks. However, some trainees saw an increase of 55%, but at the same time, some trainees actually saw a decrease of 5%. This means there was a range of -5% to +55% on muscle growth. So, what causes the difference in growth? Well, a few things. First, the one area you have no control over: genetics. Our individual genetics can exert great effort on how much muscle we grow. For example, a mutation in your MTSN gene. Your MTSN gene is responsible for encoding what's known as myostatin. Myostatin regulates muscle growth by actually impeding it. In other words, when myostatin is present, it prevents muscle growth. Research has found that when there are mutations in this MTSN gene, it prevents the production of myostatin. As a result, the individual is able to grow significantly more muscle faster. In fact, it's reported that pro strongman Eddie Hall has this mutation, a real-life Hercules. On the other hand, there are what are called non-responders, or those who don't respond to the stimuli of resistance training in the same degree as, quote, normal people. A 2011 study attempted to identify what caused differences in muscle growth, so they placed 56 active but untrained men on a 5-day-a-week training program for 12 weeks. At the same time, they were looking for the presence of something called microRNAs. These microRNAs are non-coding RNA molecules that regulate muscle protein synthesis. Then they compared the muscle gain of the top 20% with the bottom 20% and found that there could be up to a 4 times difference in muscle growth between the highest and lowest groups. In addition, there was a correlation between expressions of various microRNAs with the low and high responders. Unfortunately, or even fortunately depending on where you land on the spectrum, there's absolutely nothing you can do about this. So while it's interesting to know, let's look at some factors you do have control over during your first year. First, to optimize your muscle growth, you have to eat right. When we train, we place a ton of stress on our bodies. This stress breaks down muscle, which then requires fuel to rebuild. Short disclaimer, there's a ton of nuance with losing fat and gaining muscle together, and we'll touch on that later, but generally, you need to focus on one or the other. So first, you need to eat. You need those calories for energy to build new muscle. In fact, without it, you might actually lose muscle. Therefore, getting in a daily surplus of 300 to 500 calories will help maximize your growth. Second, you gotta up your protein. Protein is made up of amino acids, the building blocks of muscle, which are responsible for repairing damaged muscle and promoting muscle growth. Your new training will cause extra muscle damage, increasing your protein needs. Skimping out on protein as a new lifter could literally mean forfeiting gains in your first year, and there's studies to back this up. In 2007, a study used 19 untrained men in a 10-week resistance training study. These men were put into two groups. The first group consumed a protein-free shake with 20 grams of dextrose before and after training, so 40 grams total. The second group drank a shake consisting of 20 grams of protein before and after training, also 40 grams total. Every other variable was virtually the same, including their program. At the end of 10 weeks, the carb group gained 2.7 kilograms of muscle mass, while the protein group gained 5.6 kilograms, almost 2 times as much. With that said, try to eat at least 1.6 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. However, 2 grams per kilogram might even produce better results. And here we need to talk about carbs. We know that keto and low-carb diets are all the rage these days. We're not going to get into the intricacies of keto, but we will say don't do it if building muscle is your goal. While researchers still don't understand the exact mechanisms, new research shows that carb intake has a role in muscle hypertrophy. As such, studies have found that keto can affect the total amount of muscle one can gain. To see this play out with untrained lifters, let's look at another study. In 2020, this study specifically looked at the effect of keto on untrained individuals. The study put 2 groups of trainees on a resistance program for 8 weeks, a keto group and a traditional diet group. After the 8 weeks of training, the trainees on a keto diet made no notable changes in lean body mass. On the contrary, those who followed a traditional diet saw an increase of 2.8 kilograms. It's important to note that both groups ate 2 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight, so the only difference was the amount of carbs. With that in mind, save the low-carb diets for later, as they're definitely not ideal when muscle mass is your #1 goal. What's considered low-carb? There's no specific definition, but you'll likely see much better results with at least 2 to 3 grams of carbs per kilogram of body weight. Another factor that'll affect muscle gain in your first year is supplements. Will you do this 100% natural, or will you use some nutrition supplements? While we already talked about protein shakes, now we're going to talk about things like creatine and, well, we're just going to talk about creatine. That's because creatine is by far the most powerful supplement on the market. It's the most studied and the most effective supplement we can take to increase our muscle growth. If you're trying to increase muscle mass and not taking creatine, you're doing it wrong. In long-term studies, trainees taking creatine gained up to twice as much muscle mass as those who didn't. This equates to about an extra 4 pounds in 12 weeks of training. In short, you should expect to gain a lot more muscle during your first year of training if you're taking creatine. But wait, genetics strikes again. While creatine is fantastic, genetics plays a role here too. There's about a 20% chance you're either a non-responder or a quasi-responder to creatine. If this is you, you're not going to see the same results as responders. And of course, then there's your actual training. Everyone wants a secret program to put on as much muscle mass as possible. Well, it turns out that it doesn't really matter what you do during your first year of training. That is, as long as you follow some basic guidelines. First, follow a program emphasizing progressive overload. That means following a program that gets more difficult over time. Your body will quickly acclimate to whatever you're doing, so you have to keep challenging it. You're simply not going to grow if you don't give your body a reason. Second, concentrate on increasing that progressive overload by increasing total volume. During your first year, this extra volume will be able to come from simply adding small increments of weight on the bar. More weight on the bar equals bigger muscles. Third, studies show that training a muscle 2 to 3 times a week provides the best results. This is true for both trained and untrained individuals. That means you've got to give your body time to rest. Even if you're excited to hit the gym every single day, you've got to give your body some time to relax and grow those muscles you're working on. Fourth, train with maximal intensity or very close to it. Some studies have shown that when trained to failure, untrained individuals can see maximal progress when using just one set in the upper body muscles. In recent years, there's been growing evidence that it's better to train a couple reps shy of failure. as it produces similar amounts of hypertrophy and strength while reducing overall fatigue. But regardless of whether you go to failure or stop just before, the real point is that intensity plays a major role, especially in untrained lifters. And fifth, stick with compound movements your first year. That means exercises like squats, bench press, and deadlifts. Multiple studies have shown that when training appropriately, a single joint exercise like seated leg curls provide no benefit to a training program for novice lifters. On the other hand, compound exercises not only decrease the time needed, they also elicit greater gains in strength. So we're not saying don't ever use isolation, but focus on using compound movements to make up the majority of your program, especially during your first year. So we just reviewed some of the factors that will affect your muscle growth in your first year. But what does all this mean for us? We've mostly been focused on those looking at gaining muscle in their first year. However, we know there are a lot of people who want to lose fat while gaining muscle when they first start training, what we call a body recomposition. In the past, it's usually been thought that this can't happen. However, there are an increasing amount of studies that show this is actually possible. This is especially true during your first year of training. As a new lifter in your first year, the stimuli of the weights will be completely new, causing a massive response. For example, in 2006, a study using recreational bodybuilders showed a 10-week program resulted in a gain of 5 kilograms of muscle mass while decreasing 1.5 kilograms of fat. Remember, these men were novices, not completely untrained, which suggests that 100% untrained could see even better results. As long as you don't eat an excess amount of calories, you can probably expect to see a loss of fat on some level. This will largely depend on your starting body fat percentage. However, just to be sure you stick with one goal for your first year. Don't try to get huge and shredded for that first summer. If you're really concerned with dropping fat in your first year, we recommend you eat an even higher amount of protein, since the one common variable in most studies that show a successful body recomp is high protein. Dr. Jose Antonio from ISSN did a fascinating study on just this in 2022. He used 2 groups of trainees on an 8-week program. The 2 groups were a normal protein group who received 2 grams of protein per kilogram of body mass, and a high protein group who received 3.4 grams per kilogram. At the end of the 8 weeks, both groups saw an increase in fat-free mass of 1.5 kilograms. Now, what's intriguing is even though the high-protein group consumed significantly more calories than the normal group due to the additional calories from the protein, they actually had a greater decrease in body fat, with the higher protein group losing an average of 1.6 kilos of fat versus 0.3 kilograms lost by the normal group. But how long must you wait to start seeing results? Fortunately for you, this doesn't take a year. Far from it. This is important, as seeing growth can be just the motivating factor you need to keep pushing forward. You're not going to see any noticeable changes right away, as your body needs time to repair itself and grow. In fact, you'll likely see no change at all for the first few weeks. It's going to take about a month to start seeing some noticeable results, then another 1 to 2 months to see some significant changes. While that may seem like a long time to wait, trust us, it's worth it. What seems to happen to everybody is that one day they wake up, go to the shower, and catch themselves in the mirror. All of a sudden, they can see all their hard work has paid off. Maybe it's a bicep vein poking through, or your delts have a nice little cap. Whatever it is you notice first, it's one of the best highs you'll get in your lifting career. So, what's the real answer? How much muscle can you realistically expect to put on in your first year of training? Well, we've gone over quite a few different studies and saw significant gains. For example, some of the studies suggest 5 kilograms in 10 weeks, 2.8 kilograms in 8 weeks, 5.6 kilograms in 10 weeks, or 5 kilograms in 12 weeks. Those numbers fall in line with what you can expect in your first year, anywhere from half a kilogram to 2 kilograms per month, with an average of 1 kilogram per month. This means you might be able to grow 24 kilograms or over 50 pounds of muscle in your first year. Well, not exactly. Recall that there is a range in the rate of growth, and while it would be nice, those higher rates of growth won't stay consistent throughout the year. In fact, you'll only see the maximum rate of growth for the first few months. While there haven't really been any specific studies that have examined this long term, it's estimated that the maximum amount of time one might see higher rates of growth is 20 weeks, which is followed by a decrease. With that said, an increase of 20 to 25 pounds will be an average amount of muscle growth in your first year of training. Knowing how much you can gain is pretty cool, but how does it impact our training? Well, as you saw, there was a significant amount of variance in the study results. This variance is a result of the many factors that can affect your growth. While some of these you can't control, there are quite a few you can. To ensure you maximize your growth in the first year, we highly encourage you to remember a few things to maximize your gains in 365 days. First, get in a 300 to 500 calorie surplus. Second, make sure you eat enough protein, at least 1.6 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. However, eating 2 grams might produce even better results and may even be more effective for a body recomp. Remember, no low-carb diets. Eat 2 to 3 grams of carbs per kilogram of body weight. As for supplements, if you're going to take one, take creatine. Get enough rest, including sleep, 7 to 9 hours every night. And follow a structured program that emphasizes progressive overload by increasing volume, focuses on compound movements, and trains each muscle 2 times per week. Easy, right? But whether you have that mutated MSTN gene or are stuck with regular old genes like most of us, the amount of muscle you gain shouldn't really have any massive effect on your training. Your job in the gym is to always give 100% effort and train consistently. Then, you just gotta fuel, rest, and do it all over again. If you do that, you've done your job. This repetition and consistency is the true secret of maximizing your muscle mass in year 1 of training and for all of the years beyond that first one. How long should you actually rest between sets to maximize muscle growth? Should you do your sets as quickly as possible or take a long break in between? Could the amount of time you're actually taking be hurting your performance and costing you gains? Well, new scientific research has the answer to those exact questions and will finally reveal how long you should rest between sets to optimize muscle growth. When it comes to prescribing an exercise, there are 4 variables you must decide on that could affect its outcome: the load or how much weight to use, the amount of sets to do, the amount of repetitions or reps per set, and finally how much rest between sets to use. Rest refers to the length of time spent between performing sets. This time allows the body to recover from the previous set by replenishing ATP and letting our physiological systems come back to homeostasis, things like our blood pressure and heart rate. Ultimately, we rest because we're not machines. Our bodies need these periods of rest to perform more work. Therefore, the issue isn't if we should rest, it's how long we should rest to maximize muscle growth. It sounds simple, but this is where the question gets complicated. Depending on who you ask, this ideal rest period may lay anywhere on a range of time from a short 30 seconds to a long 5-minute or longer rest. The primary determinant is what the person believes the rest period is used for. Before we go further, we need to define what is meant by short or long in terms of rest. Short is generally used to define rest from 30 to 90 seconds. On the other hand, longer rest periods are believed to be ideal for strength gains. This is generally described as anything that's 2 minutes or longer. Traditionally, muscle growth has been associated with things like drop sets, supersets, and training to failure to elicit a thing known as metabolic stress. Metabolic stress is one of the 3 major mechanisms we need for muscle growth, the other 2 being muscle tension and muscle damage. To illustrate its importance, in 2010, Dr. Schoenfeld released a large meta-analysis on the mechanisms of muscle hypertrophy. In it, he concludes that current research suggests that maximum muscle gains and muscle hypertrophy are achieved by training regimens that produce significant metabolic stress while maintaining a moderate degree of muscle tension. Not only do shorter rest times increase metabolic stress, they're also believed to cause more muscle damage and muscle fatigue, other mechanisms that trigger muscle growth. As such, in the past, shorter rest periods have been the go-to prescription for maximal gains. The 2010 meta mentioned before even recommends 60 to 90 seconds for optimal hypertrophy training. In fact, this still tends to be the practice most people follow when muscle growth is the goal. But does that mean that it's the best? Well, over recent years, our understanding of hypertrophy training has grown quite a bit. Many of the lessons passed down as canon from gym buddy to gym buddy have turned out to be, well, not as correct as we once thought. And this includes what we know about rest periods. As we move forward, there's one thing we first want to address. You'll often hear these questions phrased as which is better, which is fine. However, we often hear the answer as absolute if choice A is better, then choice B is bad. But that's the completely wrong way to look at it. You need to understand that both short and long rest periods can be good for muscle growth. We just have the luxury to determine which is optimal. With that said, let's see if we can determine the best amount of rest for maximum muscle growth. To determine the optimal amount of time we need for rest, we first need to determine what the ultimate goal is from our rest. What exactly are we hoping to achieve from it? What is it about rest that affects muscle growth? We already mentioned that in the past, shorter rest periods were believed to be ideal as they allowed a greater amount of metabolic damage. And one study that backs up this theory was performed in 2018. In this study, two groups of trainees used two different loading schemes and rest periods. The first group used a 20 RM load, that's repetition maximum, with a 30-second rest interval, while the second group used an 8 RM load with a 3-minute rest interval. And at the end of the study, the 30-second rest group demonstrated more metabolic stress and greater hypertrophic adaptations. That seems pretty clear. Using shorter rest periods for more metabolic stress wins. Case closed, right? Well, not exactly, as we left out one important aspect. Other than the fact that the loads were different, in this study the total volume was controlled so that both groups performed the same amount of volume. In short, volume is the total amount of work that we place on the muscle. We usually compute this as volume equals sets times reps times load. In simple terms, it's how much you lift. With that in mind, the volume was systematically controlled to remain the same for the two groups of lifters. While this is interesting, this isn't how the real world works. Let's compare two possibilities. Let's say you're performing 3 sets of bicep curls. Which do you think will allow for more volume? 30 seconds of rest or 3 minutes of rest? Obviously, using 3 minutes would. The shorter you rest, the harder it'll be to do the same amount of volume multiple times. Remember this little thought experiment as it'll come up again. Therefore, what the study tells us is that if total volume is equal, then metabolic stress may play a determining factor in causing greater muscle growth. As such, in this scenario, using shorter rests is important. However, this scenario is highly unlikely to play out in the real world, so it's not directly applicable to what we're looking for. Other reasons someone might suggest a shorter rest period is for things like hormonal secretion or getting the pump. Everyone has chased the pump before, so let's look at that. Back in the day, we used to think that the pump was just a transitory period when blood flow increased and engorged our muscles. The muscle would then look extra jacked for a little bit and allowed us to take some insane social pics. However, the blood would eventually flow and you'd go back to looking just sorta jacked. Well, good news! We now know that the pump actually plays a role in hypertrophy. Scientifically known as cell swelling, this pump does seem to have an anabolic property. The mechanisms aren't 100% clear, but it's thought to have something to do with the buildup of metabolites or the triggering of anabolic hormonal release. A simple study from 2022 demonstrated this by comparing muscle swelling to muscle growth during a 6-week study. They concluded that the greater the muscle swelling immediately after the first session of RT, that's resistance training, the greater the muscle hypertrophy after RT. Pretty straightforward. As greater pumps are built with smaller rest intervals, this might be it. Everyone loves chasing the pump, but just like before, the volume for the groups in the study stayed the same for each group. But once again, this isn't how it works in reality, so we again can't directly apply it to our own answer. Instead of going any further, we'll just tell you right now, there are numerous processes that increase muscle growth. A lot. However, there is one training variable that sits as king. And this brings us to what we now know we want to achieve. As you probably have guessed from our examples above, increasing total volume should be the primary goal for our rest periods. What about the other variables, such as metabolic stress? Keep in mind, those are not competing against each other. Rather, they're all working and interacting with one another to maximize muscle growth. Therefore, they all affect muscle growth. However, only one can reign as supreme, and that honor goes to volume. The relationship between training volume and muscle hypertrophy is one of the clearest and most studied interactions that exists with the science of resistance training. For example, in 2017, a meta-analysis looked at 15 different studies that researched this relationship. In it, they concluded that there is a clear dose-response relationship between weekly volume and muscle growth. Another study from 2017 titled Volume for Muscle Hypertrophy and Health Outcomes, the most effective variable in resistance training, concluded that when equated, volume seems one of, if not the most important factors affecting muscle hypertrophy, as long as training has sufficient intensity. We could go on and on, but with what we know now, increasing total volume is king. It's now interesting to note that this last study also gives guidance on improving muscle growth, one of which is to use appropriate rest intervals. So we'll ask you to recall the question we asked earlier concerning what would allow more volume, 30-second rest or 3-minute rest. Obviously, it was the 3 minutes of rest. But even though this seems pretty straightforward and obvious, we can look at a study just to be sure. In 2016, Dr. Brad Schoenfeld led a study that specifically asked this very question. 2 groups of men, a short rest group and a long rest group, ran a full-body resistance training program for 8 weeks. The short rest group used 1-minute rest intervals, while the long rest group used 3 minutes, with all other variables being similar. At the end of the study, the long group saw greater muscle hypertrophy and strength, which is believed to be due to the significantly larger amounts of volume allowed by the longer rest periods. So now you're probably asking, how long should I rest? You may think if 2 minutes is better than 1 minute, 10 minutes will put me on the path to IFBB Pro. While this makes sense, it would only be true if 10 minutes allowed more volume and if you don't mind a 3-hour workout. So while we all know that in general, longer is better than shorter, this doesn't mean you should watch all of Pumping Iron between your sets. Heck, don't even watch this entire video between your sets. In 2022, a study wanted to isolate the rest interval to see if it had any effect on muscle growth independently. They compared the muscle growth of a group that used 1-minute rest intervals to a group that used 3-minute intervals. However, the volume was equated for. They concluded that rest intervals of 1 or 3 minutes produce similar hypertrophic increases provided VL, that's volume load, is equated between conditions. In other words, resting longer only helps if it allows more volume, otherwise it's just wasting time. The issue with this is determining your personal threshold. How much rest do you need to wait for maximal reps? Luckily, there's been studies to help you determine that. A study from 2004 used 28 men to perform the bench press on 3 different days. Each day, they used different rest periods, 1, 3, and 5 minutes. They found that both the 3 and 5-minute rest days allowed for significantly more volume compared to 1 minute for all men. However, things aren't so clear when comparing 3-minute rest to 5-minute rest. Some of the men were able to perform more reps with the 5-minute rest than they could with the 3 minutes, albeit being less substantial than the difference between 1 and 3 minutes. At the same time, however, some men weren't able to perform any more reps using the 5-minute rest. All they needed was 3 minutes for maximal volume. We learned 3 important factors in the study. First, the return will decrease the longer you rest. Are you willing to rest an extra 30 seconds if it allows 4 more reps? What about waiting 1 more minute if it only allows 1 more rep? At a certain point, it'll not be worth it to wait longer as it'll yield less return. However, this payoff will be different from person to person. Secondly, there's a maximum yield at some point. Everyone will reach a point where waiting longer won't produce any more reps. At this point, your rest period really does just become a waste of time. And thirdly, as we discussed, the optimal rest time will really differ from person to person, so you'll have to figure out what works best for you. Theoretically, you want to rest the shortest amount of time that allows the maximal amount of reps. This should then be weighed against how much time you have. The issue in prescribing a perfect time is that everyone is different. Some people have more efficient recovery systems than others, like in the study we just discussed. In addition, some people may only have 40 minutes to spend in the gym, while others have 2 hours. This means that some people will need to take shorter, longer rest periods than others to optimize their training session. So what do? Well, we might have an answer out of left field. What if we don't prescribe specific rest intervals? What if we let every person choose how long to rest? In 2016, a study compared a self-selected rest period to a 2-minute rest period for 4 exercises: squat, leg press, bench press, and bicep curl. The participants performed 3 sets to failure, and total reps and volume were then compared. They found that total volume and reps were similar for both groups, yet the self-selected group generally rested shorter than 2 minutes on average. This fits perfectly. We don't need to be on our knees watching the seconds tick by before we're allowed to do our next set. Rather, we need to respect the time frame prescribed, but if we feel better a few seconds before, go for it. Or if you don't feel ready yet, feel free to wait a little longer. We do need to reiterate that this form of autoregulation only works for experienced lifters. These individuals are familiar with their bodies and what recovery feels like. If you're a beginner, just stick to a prescribed set of time for your rest until you have a better body awareness. There's still one more variable to consider. What exercise are you performing? As you can probably guess, doing big compound exercises, such as back squats, require more recovery time than smaller accessory work or isolations like bicep curls. The good news is that a study from 2016 specifically looked at this for us too. Well, not just for us, but for everyone, you get the idea. But they concluded that smaller work such as chest flies require about 2 minutes of rest, while compound lifts like bench press require 3 to 5 minutes. So what does all this mean for you? It means that longer rest intervals are more beneficial for muscle growth as long as they allow more volume. Once you've hit maximum volume, resting longer turns into wasting time. Therefore, optimal rest times would have you rest at the shortest amount of time you need to hit maximal volume. As everyone's different, it's impossible to give you an exact number for everybody, but we do have enough information to provide you with some useful guidelines. If we were to take nothing else into consideration, roughly 5-minute rest intervals across the board for every exercise would be optimal to ensure you're taking enough time. But we know most people aren't trying to wait around that long in the gym. Therefore, the numbers we would suggest you start with are 3.5 to 4 minutes for your primary movements. These are the heaviest and most taxing movements, like squats, deadlift, bench press, shoulder press, and are the ones you should typically do first. Next up are the major compound movements. These are also compound movements but use lighter weight and will often be paired with a similar primary movement. For example, if you did bench press that day, dumbbell press or incline press could be a major compound movement. If you did a back squat, you'd follow that with front squats, and you should rest around 2.5 to 3 minutes between those. For accessory compound movements, which are compound movements that use smaller loads, for exercises like seated row or machine press, 2-minute rests should be enough. Then for smaller accessory and isolation work, such as flies and curls, you should be looking at around 90 seconds of rest between sets. Keep in mind, there's nothing magical about any of these numbers. They're only approximate guesses, with what we know and what numbers have been seen to be effective in studies. If you're experienced and you know your body, you can use your own judgment to alter these times a bit. You can also experiment with rest times to see how your body responds. Now, we know these rest times are probably longer than you're used to. Therefore, what if you don't want to wait so long between sets? Or maybe you only have a limited time. What can you still do to maximize gains? We have the perfect answer for you: supersets. Supersets are when you perform 2 exercises back to back. However, the exercises used are of opposing muscle groups. Think bench press and bent over rows or curls and skull crushers. You could even pair a lower body exercise with an upper body exercise. As the exercises hit different muscles, muscle A can rest while you work muscle B. This means you're still able to let your muscles rest longer while limiting the time you're physically resting. To maximize recovery, we'd like to perform supersets a little differently. Instead of performing the movements back to back and then rest, use a consistent rest time of 1 to 1.5 minutes between each exercise. So it ends up looking like this: perform exercise A, rest for 1 to 1.5 minutes. Perform exercise B, rest for 1 to 1.5 minutes. Repeat exercise A, rest, and so on. Even though you're still resting between, ultimately this ends up saving time over doing a single exercise with long rests in between each set. But what about pump work and traditional methods of bodybuilding? You can still use things like drop sets, compound sets, and forced reps. However, keep those for the smaller muscle groups toward the end of your workout so that it doesn't affect total volume. After wading through all the research, we learned from all of it that rest, just like every other variable, should be used to maximize volume. We use moderate reps and moderate loads to assure optimal amounts of volume of sufficient intensity. Therefore, it makes sense to manipulate our rest so that it too maximizes volume, thus eliciting more muscle hypertrophy. At the same time, you don't need to fret about getting your rest just right. Waiting a little too long isn't going to throw off your training, nor is maybe missing a rep for not resting long enough once in a while. Just like everything else with hypertrophy training, it's the cumulative effect of everything you do that determines your muscle growth. Your rest time just happens to be the one variable where doing nothing for longer has its benefits. If the time of day you train affected your muscle growth and performance, would you alter your schedule? Well, here's a newsflash for you: it can. The question is, what exactly is the best time to start chasing those gains? It seems there are 2 types of lifters: morning lifters and evening lifters, and they both say it's the best time to train. Is there more to this than just preference? We wanted to find out what the research says, so we examined how these times can affect our training and what time gets better results. Is it the early bird or the night owl? Or does it even matter that much? As it turns out, there is a time that can produce superior results, and this video will tell you when. Now, before we get into the video, we wanted to ask you, when do you usually like to work out, AM or PM? Further, can you pinpoint why this is? Is it simply more convenient? Do you feel you have better sessions when training during different parts of the day? Do you find that training outside of your preferred time has a negative effect? If you're like most people, you likely have a time you hit the gym 90% of the time. Maybe you're part of the 7 a.m. crowd, or perhaps you train with the 5 p.m. people. Up to now, perhaps you just felt this was based on preference or simply because that's when it's convenient for you, and you probably are right to some extent. However, while preference can play a role, there are actually true physiological changes that happen throughout the day which can affect physical performance as well as adaptations. In other words, at some times you may be stronger, while at other times you have the potential for more muscle growth. You see, our bodies have a plethora of physiological systems that can cause fluctuations internally throughout the day. For example, in the morning, there's a rise in the hormone cortisol. Even though cortisol is also known as our stress hormone, it also helps prepare your body for the day by increasing alertness, mobilizing energy stores, and kickstarting our metabolism. So could this affect our training? Well, as cortisol is also a catabolic hormone that promotes the breakdown of muscle for fuel, it's safe to say it very well can have an effect on training adaptations. We'll look at these effects in more detail later in the video and give you a tip on how to maximize their negative effects. For now, let's look at another hormone that fluctuates throughout the day, melatonin. Melatonin, or our sleep hormone, is elevated at night. It'll make us feel tired and it helps us fall asleep. If you decided to fight it and stay up, it'll make you feel groggy. This is definitely not conducive to an effective workout. Therefore, we probably don't want to work out when melatonin's being pumped into our blood. As you can see, there's likely more to consider than just preference when we choose a time of day to work out. In order to find a solid answer, we need to look at actual studies that have looked at this predicament. Because of the effects this might have on an athlete's performance, there's a fair bit of research around this topic that'll allow us to determine the ideal time frame to train. So let's get into it. One of the primary factors that can dictate the best time of day to train is our circadian rhythm. Known as our internal biological clock, the circadian rhythm is a natural internal process that regulates our sleep-wake cycle. In short, this is why we get tired at nighttime and experience wakefulness during daylight hours as mentioned above. Circadian rhythm has a wide effect on the body and can influence various physiological and behavioral processes, including hormone production, body temperature, metabolism, and cognitive functions. For example, just a bit earlier, we spoke about how the levels of the hormones cortisol and melatonin fluctuate throughout the day. This too is controlled by your circadian rhythm. While these fluctuations have a profound effect on daily life, they've also been shown to have a significant influence on athletic performance and training adaptations. In fact, these alterations to our systems are what cause a detriment to performance in athletes after a long flight. Extra long flights that cross multiple time zones create what's known as jet lag. This basically refers to the time of day not matching up with your circadian rhythm. The effects of jet lag on athletes can vary, but they're never good. Some documented fluctuations in performance can be seen in variations in our neurological system. As a result, peak levels of strength occur at specific times throughout the day, normally in the afternoon or evening. For example, isometric grip strength seems to peak sometime between 1400 or 2 p.m. and 1900 or 7 p.m., as well as back strength. In addition, elbow flexion strength varies with the time of day as well and also peaks in the early evening. However, the strength of your knee extensors have been found to peak at two different times, the end of the morning and the late afternoon or early evening. As we'll see, early evening and late afternoon tend to be the time frame for best performances. In fact, a review of athletic world records reveal that the majority have been completed during this time frame. The circadian rhythm is so influential, it also affects our cardio, cardiac output, submaximal time to failure, and more. Simply put, circadian rhythm can definitely play a role in affecting your workout. One of the more powerful physiological processes affected by the circadian rhythm is our endocrine system, or our hormones. We spoke about this briefly at the beginning of the video. Levels of testosterone, the male's primary sex hormone, and a major natural steroid hormone do not stay consistent throughout the day. Rather, it fluctuates from the time you wake up to the time you go to sleep. However, peak levels are present in the morning from 7 to 9 a.m. This is similar to the raised cortisol levels in the morning we know occurs. The levels of these two hormones are important as muscle growth can be affected by their ratio. In order to optimize muscle adaptations, you want high levels of testosterone and low levels of cortisol. Well, research has found that resistance training in the evening can improve the testosterone to cortisol ratio by decreasing cortisol the following morning. Yet another advantage of training in the evening. In addition to the above factors, researchers have tried to suggest other variables that can affect a person's performance during the day. One of the most basic explanations is that people's bodies are simply too tired in the morning, nor are they prepared to train. People will generally wake up dehydrated, which needs to be remedied quickly upon waking before training. That's a major problem, as just a minimal amount of dehydration can have massive effects on performance. For example, just a 2.5% drop in body weight from fluid might result in a 45% drop in performance in high-intensity exercise. While the drop in strength and power isn't as profound, there's still a deficit of about 3%, while high-intensity endurance drops by 10%. On the other side of being dehydrated is being fasted. Depending on what time someone eats in the morning, consuming enough nutrition before training can be difficult. If a person's unable to consume adequate amounts of carbs and protein, they run the risk of seeing diminished returns. Not only can this be challenging time-wise, but some people find it difficult to eat too close to training. Now, let's say you're able to wake up, hydrate, and eat like a champ. Even if you go to the gym with perfect hydration and the optimal amount of nutrition to fuel your workout, there's still a major problem: your internal temperature. Of all factors, some researchers believe this may have the most profound effect. Upon waking, a person's internal temperature is simply lower. Some researchers estimated that power output decreases by 5% for every 1 degree Celsius decline in muscle temperature, at least between 30 and 39 degrees Celsius. In other words, warmer muscles will lead to a better workout. The problem this presents for morning trainees is that our muscles are colder in the morning. It can take until about 3 p.m. for your muscles to hit their warmest temperatures. It'll then stay there until later in the evening. As you can see, your muscles experience a lot of alterations throughout the day. There's even evidence that shows there are architectural changes. In addition, the stiffness in tendons has been found to alter throughout the day. For example, the patellar tendon stiffness is 20% higher in the morning compared to the evening. So not only is there one factor that can affect your training time, there are in fact numerous factors. These can all affect one's performance and strength throughout the day. What's interesting is that most of these adaptations benefit training in the late afternoon or early evening. However, how does this play out in real life? Let's look at some studies that have specifically looked at training in the AM or PM to find the best time. In one study, 72 young men followed a training program using strength and endurance combined sessions for 24 weeks. Part of the study was to find if it's better to train strength before endurance or endurance before strength. However, it also aimed to discover if AM or PM training was best. Therefore, the men were divided into either a morning workout group or an evening workout group. The morning groups trained between 6:30 and 10 a.m., while the evening group trained between 4:30 and 8 p.m. Apart from training strength or endurance first, all other variables were equal. During the first 12 weeks, all of the groups saw an equivalent increase in the cross-sectional area of their muscles, indicating the timing does not matter. However, things changed after 12 weeks. During weeks 13 to 24, only the muscle mass of the evening group continued to increase, specifically by 5.1%. In total, the morning group saw an increase of 11.9%, while the evening group saw an increase of 19.8% after 24 weeks of training. It's important to note that while strength was measured as well, all groups improved with no significant differences over the 24 weeks. Another study, while not as significant as the one we just spoke about, hints that if one time does result in greater muscle growth, it would be in the evening. In this study, 24 untrained men took part in a 10-week preparatory phase, followed by a 10-week progressive training program. The primary muscles focused on were the quadriceps, and movements such as half squats, loaded jump squats, leg presses, and knee extensions were used. The men were then divided into two groups, a morning group, which trained between 7 and 9 a.m., and an afternoon group, which trained between 5 and 7 p.m. At the end of the program, variables such as strength and muscle growth were compared to their original baselines. The morning group saw an increase of 2.7% in the cross-sectional area of the quadriceps, while the evening group saw an increase of 3.5%. Now, even though the muscle growth of the evening group is 30% greater than that of the morning group, the study specifically states that the 0.8% difference between the training groups was not significant. From a practical point of view, while interesting, it's not anywhere near being significant enough for us to change our training schedule. While these two studies do seem to provide evidence that supports training in the evening, enter a new meta-analysis from 2023. A meta-analysis is conducted by researchers that gather all of the studies on a topic and then compares them to each other to gain a unified conclusion. Ultimately, this meta-analysis concluded that there is no clear evidence that supports training at any time of day. We can then look at another review, which also concludes there's not enough evidence to recommend a certain time. However, they also mention that individual studies do suggest that late afternoon or early evening training is ideal. So think of it like this. If there is a time that's better to train, it's late afternoon or early evening. but studies are not conclusive. Until now, we've primarily discussed factors that affect us physiologically or physically, such as dehydration. However, there are still other variables we have to consider: life circumstances. The first is variability between individuals. In other words, some people are simply morning people. There are those who wake up feeling refreshed and genuinely have more energy in the morning. As the day goes on, they might lose their energy or even their motivation. Other people may just have a highly stressful or highly physical job. These jobs can sap all the energy out of a person, leaving just enough energy to get home, take a shower, and have dinner. If a person falls into any of those scenarios, they may want to continue to train in the morning. Due to their unique circumstance, this could be the time period that produces better results, either physically or mentally. In addition, we haven't talked about the most important variable: consistency. We can't talk about the best time of day to work out without talking about consistency. The reason that consistency is so important is that as the studies that benefit from the evening training occurred in a laboratory, consistency deals with real life. As we just spoke about, having stressful jobs that can make training in the evening difficult, training in the morning might simply allow a person to be more consistent with their workout. Or on the other hand, maybe training in the evening allows a person to be more consistent, or maybe in the afternoon. It doesn't really matter what time it is. If it allows you to be more consistent, that's probably your best choice. If you've listened to a person who's been training long-term speak about their progress, they almost always say that getting to the gym is just something they do. It's part of their day, like brushing their teeth. People are creatures of habit, and following a program that repeats itself daily can help implant it into your brain so that it's simply a part of your routine. For this reason, the morning does hold advantages for many people, as you can train first thing upon waking before the day starts. There are no business calls, no emergency errands, or family matters that can disrupt your well-intended plan for training in the evening. This line of thinking has actually been found to play out in real life. Research has found that morning sessions can lead to greater consistency in completing workouts in obese patients. As the patients complete more workouts, they then have better results in terms of weight loss and more favorable adaptations to their body composition. The mechanisms by which morning workouts can encourage consistency are listed by the researchers, who state that consistency in workouts may facilitate greater exercise levels by enhancing planning, fostering an exercise habit, and/or improving self-regulation. Anecdotally, but personally, we know that we are much more successful when training when it occurs at a specific time throughout the day. In fact, training at a time outside of our regular training time can actually feel foreign and awkward. Interestingly enough, this phenomenon seems to have some scientific research behind it as well. It has to do with the relationship between when one trains and when one performs. Studies have found that individuals who train in the morning perform better when they test in the morning, as opposed to the evening. On the flip side, those who train in the evening perform better in the evening compared to the morning. For example, those who trained in the morning would jump higher in the morning when testing vertical jumps. More evidence suggests consistency is the most important. Now, while not specifically studied, it would seem to make sense that this would mean you would perform better in the gym as well if you trained at the same time, especially over the long term. If we were to compare training at the same time for every session to always training at a random time, we would guess the consistent schedule would hold better results. Again, this is completely theoretical, but it's something to consider. Now let's look at another situation. Many people consider morning workouts simply to be the best time, and perhaps only time that a person can train. After looking through all the studies, there do seem to be a number of issues in the morning that could cause a setback to your training, such as a neurological deficit and cooler muscles. So what if there's absolutely no way for you to train at any time except for the morning? Luckily, there's actually a very easy and effective solution to rectify the problem, at least part of the problem. Research has found that your favorite drink in the morning can switch things up. Coffee! Well, not coffee specifically, but caffeine. Taking caffeine in the morning has been found to rectify a drop in neurological performance. A study had resistance-trained men perform performance tests, such as squats and bench presses. These tests were done under 3 conditions: in the morning at 10 a.m. with caffeine ingestion of 3 milligrams per kilogram of body weight, in the morning at 10 a.m. with placebo ingestion, and in the afternoon at 1800 hours with placebo ingestion. The total load and bar velocity were then measured. The results indicated that taking caffeine in the morning reversed the deficit seen without taking caffeine and brought performance levels up to the levels seen in the afternoon. As mentioned, the dose used in this study was 3 milligrams per kilogram of body weight. so the dose is a bit larger than many are used to. With all of this information, the question still remains: should I work out in the morning or in the evening? As life is never straightforward, let's look at a couple of situations to see how we can apply the information. The first situation takes place in a make-believe world where you have the ability to work out whenever you want. In addition, in this world you have an easy schedule, meaning there are no stressful jobs or social obligations. In this world, you should work out in the evenings. As we saw in the studies above, while not conclusive in every study, other studies suggest that if there's a better time to train, it would be the evening. Further, if you can recall the relationship between circadian rhythm, muscle force, and time of day, muscle temperature as well, late afternoon or early evening seems to be the best time as a whole. Now let's look at a real-world situation where we have jobs, a social life, and families. In this situation, the best time to work out will be the one that allows the most consistency. Remember that training at a consistent time makes it easier to form a habit and make it part of your routine. While there are studies that suggest early evening is ideal, it's not superior enough to suggest you should rearrange your life just so you can train then. Further, there are studies that suggest consistency can lead to better results. The human body is a terribly complex machine that we still don't completely understand. Where we're missing a few pieces of the puzzle is in understanding the effect that time of day has on performance. Taken together, the studies we have are inconclusive. However, if we look at them all individually, we can see a slight preference for evening workouts. Unfortunately, one variable that laboratories can't consider is life. Our lives are extremely hectic, and merely being able to choose what time to work out is a luxury in itself and not always realistic. In other words, most people don't have a choice, as their life circumstances dictate when they train. This is why we suggest you train at the time that's most convenient for you. Train when you have time and limited stress, so you can give your session 100% and train with intensity without being in a rush. More importantly, train at a time that'll allow the most consistency, which is really the most important variable of all. Question: did you know that you can grow muscle just by thinking about it? It's like a bodybuilding Jedi mind trick. Biceps, you will grow. What we're talking about is the mind-muscle connection, and it's been a part of gym wisdom for as long as the bicep curls have been around. Now, of course, there's more to it than curling your arm and demanding your biceps to grow. However, we now have actual scientific evidence to show that this is a real phenomenon. Grow biceps, grow. But wait a minute, did you just smoke a joint? Now we might have a problem, or will we? Is smoking weed going to eliminate this Jedi trick, or could it even make it stronger? Before you decide to smoke and hit the gym, you should be aware of how weed changes your physiological systems and how it could impact your training and adaptations. This video will shed light on the effects of weed on the mind-muscle connection when building muscle. Let's get into it. Bodybuilding is by far the most popular style of strength training you'll find, and this makes sense. Losing weight, building muscle, and getting shredded are a few of the main reasons people go to the gym in the first place. The primary goal of bodybuilding is to build bigger muscles and create a more muscular-looking body. To get this done, bodybuilders have a whole specialized regime they follow, along with a collection of tips and tricks. One of these tricks is something known as the mind-muscle connection. As mentioned above, the mind-muscle connection refers to focusing on a specific muscle while training to increase its activation. If you think about this, it makes sense. We're sure you have banged out a double bicep pose before, right? Did your muscles flex? Did your arms become tired even though you weren't lifting anything? You can also try right now with your quadricep. Stick your leg out and flex your quad. That's basically the mind-muscle connection. As we mentioned in the beginning of the video, this isn't just gym lore. Rather, there have been actual scientific studies to demonstrate that this actually happens. For example, in 2016, a review of literature provided considerable evidence that demonstrated lifters were able to increase muscle activation during various exercises. For example, during the bench press, lifters were able to increase muscle activity in the pectorals by 22%. When using loads equal to 50% of 1 rep max. 50% of your 1 rep max is 50% of the maximum amount of weight you can lift one time. So let's pretend your max for the bench press is 200 pounds. This means that 50% of your 1 rep max is 100 pounds. Now, this load is relatively light, which will be important in just a second. Now, this increase in activation does seem to decrease when using heavier loads, specifically 80% of their 1 rep max. This is likely due to the heavier loads already requiring more muscle activation. When using lighter loads, your body doesn't need to activate so much muscle to lift the load, leaving greater room for an increase. Regardless, it's still increased by 13%. That's 13% more muscle activation merely by thinking about it. It's like unlocking free potential for more muscle growth. And this is just one paper that shows the amazing connection that occurs between the muscles and the brain. As a whole, this system is known as your neuromuscular system. When required, your brain sends signals through neurons known as motor neurons. The signal runs down to the intended muscle and bam, you have a contraction. This is an amazing system comprising numerous complex structures and processes. And when it works amazing. Unfortunately, this isn't always the case. If there is any sort of misfire or miscommunication that occurs as the signal travels from the brain to the muscle will not respond properly. And in fact, this is seen in several neurological diseases. Parkinson's, Tourette syndrome, and cerebral palsy are just a few conditions that can affect the way your muscles move. And this is where the use of marijuana comes into play. The legalization of marijuana has been sweeping across America, with almost half the states legalizing marijuana for recreational use. As so many people use marijuana, it's inevitable that many of them go to the gym. Some are even smoking before they go to the gym as they believe it helps their training. After smoking, a person will experience what's known as a high. Upon inhalation, psychoactive properties in marijuana, known as THC, travel up into the brain and interact with your endocannabinoid system. The endocannabinoid system is a huge, complex system that is responsible for an array of functions including neurotransmitters and receptors. These receptors are found throughout the central nervous system, providing a role in both physiological and cognitive processes, including pain, mood, and appetite. Upon activation, a person will usually report a sense of euphoria and sedation. However, the endocannabinoid system also plays a role in neural functions, including control of movement and body coordination. That could be a problem. Most people associate smoking weed with feeling relaxed, spacey, and maybe even a little lazy. None of these sound particularly beneficial to pumping iron, but we'll need to look at more information before making a solid judgment. As of today, there have been no specific studies that have looked at the use of marijuana and the mind-muscle connection. However, we do have studies on weed and its effect on cognition and focus in general. By learning from this and then comparing with some anecdotal evidence, we should be able to make a pretty good call. One study from 1995 tried to answer this and examined the effect of long-term chronic use of marijuana on users. Keep in mind, these users were not necessarily lifters. What they found is that the chronic buildup of cannabinoids results in short-term and long-term cognitive impairments. They made two different observations. First is that the ability of users to focus their attention and filter out irrelevant information was hindered. Users were unable to ignore irrelevant stimuli, which ultimately decreased their overall cognitive function. What was interesting is that this was directly related to the amount of years they used, but not the frequency. On the other hand, the speed of processing was delayed significantly based on the frequency but not duration, regardless of how long you've been smoking or how much. It's important to realize that this decrease in cognitive function occurred while not intoxicated. In other words, it doesn't matter if you smoke before or after training, your brain is still affected. In 2020, another study had a different strategy. They aimed to look at the acute effect of marijuana use and cognitive function in their natural environment. If you're wondering what natural environment means, the study utilized surveys and cognitive tests that were delivered to the users' mobile phones to complete while smoking marijuana. Ultimately, this means that the users were high when completing the tasks while in a comfortable setting rather than a lab. Still, the researchers found a distinct decrease in cognition ability after smoking weed. This drop in general cognition and brain function tends to be what's seen in the majority of people who smoke. However, other studies have shown that attention span may not be as affected as other cognitive functions. When controlling for other predictors, this study concluded that results suggests that impairments on measures other than sustained attention were more robustly associated with being an adolescent marijuana user. This simply means that other functions such as memory were affected more with marijuana use than attention span. However, it's also important to note this does not mean it was improved either. So, looking at the research associated with marijuana use and cognitive function, things don't look amazing. It seems the best you could say is that attention isn't as affected as other functions. Still, the mind-muscle connection isn't exactly the same as attention, so it's still not a direct comparison. With that said, there is another source of information apart from scientific research: anecdotal. Anecdotal basically just means testimony of someone's personal experience. Sometimes people can push anecdotal evidence away as if it's completely useless. It's not. It does have value as long as you remember its source. This is especially true in a situation similar to the one we're in now. Keep in mind that while many of the studies do suggest that cognition is impaired, this isn't exactly the same as saying weed impairs the mind-muscle connection. Further, there are no specific studies. Therefore, we are simply turning to anecdotal evidence as it's all we have. When enough people are saying the same thing, it does merit some amount of consideration. However, when talking about intoxicating substances, there's another factor we need to consider. They're intoxicating. How many people swear they're better drivers after drinking? And you think you're a good dancer after a few drinks. The point is that even though people may really think their training has improved, that's not necessarily true. But before we get into the anecdotal evidence, let's first look at the use of weed with exercise in a general sense. In 2019, there was a survey of 605 individuals and their opinion on the use of marijuana and exercise. Of these 605 people, 81.7% endorsed the use of marijuana either before or after exercise. 68.9% used weed within 1 hour before exercise, and 67% of participants opted for cannabis both before and after exercise. What's even more shocking is that individuals who partook in weed had higher levels of daily activity compared to those who don't. 40% of cannabis users met or exceeded the recommendations of the American College of Sports Medicine to complete a minimum of 150 minutes of aerobic exercise per week, while only 28.7% of non-consumers did. There are also other studies that suggest this as well. What this seems to suggest is that smoking weed doesn't automatically mean you're going to be lazy. In fact, it seems to suggest that you're going to do more exercise. Now, we don't know whether this shows causation or correlation, but it is interesting to consider, mainly as most people automatically assume people who smoke weed are lazy. It also begs the question, if weed was a detriment to your workout, why do so many people do it? Interesting? Yes. Proof of an effect on the mind-muscle connection? No. Where can we find evidence? Well, there is a surprising amount of testimony on various forums online, such as Reddit. Reddit is sometimes anything but scientific, but it is a great source to read the real-world experiences of people. As we said before, you just need to keep this in mind. With that said, there is a surprising amount of information there. In fact, there's an entire post entitled, "Does marijuana help you to establish a better mind-muscle connection?" More than half of the responses were positive. You might even say highly positive. Get it? Because they're high? Well, we're not comedians, but many of the comments really are very positive about using weed to enhance the mind-muscle connection. For example, here's a section of one member. "It was intense, I was laser-focused, and my contractions were amazing, especially in areas where I don't normally feel as though I'm working hard enough or stressing. It was great." This type of sentiment can be found throughout the boards along with the same frequency. It's definitely a topic that's spoken about with lifters, as well as something that has been tried, quite a bit actually. Just a few other comments include, "Mind-to-muscle connection is insane, which leads to a better pump. I still lift heavy, but when I'm baked, I love the burning sensation of taking higher rep sets to failure. When I do pull-ups high, I really feel my muscles. Best description I can give is that it feels like my muscle fibers themselves are stretching more or something." In addition to the positive opinions, we did notice one other common idea held by many lifters. This is important as we feel this take on weed and the mind-muscle connection is the most accurate answer. But before we tell you what that is, we wanted to share one more scientific survey done on the use of marijuana and exercise. This piece shocked us when we read it, and so you may further be surprised when you hear this information. In 2022, a scientific survey was conducted with 131 individuals and their use of marijuana and physical activity. Over 60 activities were reported, with hiking, yoga, and aerobic machines being the most frequently reported. So you can find weed being used with a ton of sports and exercise. Still, what's most important is the #1 reason people choose to smoke weed concurrently with exercise. 66% of the people reported that smoking weed helped them to focus and concentrate. The #2 reason at 65% was enhancing mind-body-spirit connection. Now, that's not exactly the same, but it sounds to be pretty close to what we're looking for. Being in tune with your body must be able to help establish that mind-muscle connection. There's even an online fitness workout website with an entire training system built around getting high. On it, they too speak about this mind-spirit connection and how marijuana helps them to get in tune with their own body. Have you ever heard of a runner's high? This is a sense of euphoria and high self-esteem that's commonly reported when people are involved with longer durations of training. At one time, this was just a part of runners' lore. People always reported it, but there had never been any scientific evidence for it. But there is now. Researchers now know that prolonged training increases the levels of a cannabinoid known as endocannabinoid anandamide. Endocannabinoid anandamide acts on your endocannabinoid system and actually produces a high very similar to weed. The point being is that the activation of these receptors is virtually the same when done with exercise or smoking weed, which may suggest that smoking weed brings about these deeper connections. It's where nature and our body's systems cross paths. Or maybe that's just trying too hard to make a connection that's not there. We can't say for sure, as this metaphysical aspect of marijuana and the spirit can't be studied, but we must admit it is interesting to identify these similarities found in nature and the human body. We went over a lot of information to think about. Before we make a full analysis on marijuana and the mind-muscle connection, let's put the Jedi trick to the side for a minute and look at weed's other effects on bodybuilding and building muscle. In other words, is it even worth risking? Similar to the mind-muscle connection, it's very difficult to provide a definite answer. While there are studies, results are contradictory and are far from conclusive. However, there's enough to pull together to get a good idea. For those lifters and athletes who partake, a major area that's improved by smoking weed is post-workout and recovery. It's generally reported that smoking weed makes it easy to relax and rest after an intense session. As recovery is crucial for performance, if something allows you to rest better, it makes sense to conclude it's beneficial. One mechanism that may make this possible is the analgesic effect of marijuana. While much of this evidence comes from anecdotal reports, there is some scientific research. For example, in 2021, a group of researchers found evidence that the use of weed might provide some benefit in attenuating muscle damage after a bout of heavy resistance training. One area where marijuana does provide a definite benefit is it stimulates an appetite. Getting a case of the munchies is probably the best known side effect of smoking weed. If you are sitting down all day, this could have a massive effect on your waistline. However, if you're going to the gym and trying to build muscle, your body could use those extra calories. This is really important for hard gainers. So while there are some areas that seem to benefit, there are other areas that seem to see a hit. One of the most common areas reported is overall endurance, workload, and overall strength output. All that to say is that marijuana doesn't seem to be an amazing ergogenic aid for sports performance. If it is, it seems to vary from person to person. So this all leads to the question, does smoking weed affect the mind-muscle connection in bodybuilding? And for that, we can say it seems to, for some people. Remember earlier when we were talking about the anecdotal evidence of individuals, we said that there was another piece of information reported that really sheds light on this whole conundrum. We left out one part when speaking of people's personal experience, and it's telling. For example, one person with a positive response stated this in terms of smoking weed to increase the mind-muscle connection. In the past, hell yeah. And I know plenty of others who would vouch for using pot before exercising. Sounds like a closed case. But this person then goes on to say, but I also know many others who would say that it's detrimental. This is echoed several times in the testimony we read. Some people liked it, some people hated it, some felt that they had a better connection but lifted less weight, some vice versa. We could go on and on about the contradictory reports. What we found interesting is just like that one Redditor, even though they liked it, they admitted they know plenty of people who don't. Let's remember that smoking weed has psychoactive effects, and not everyone will respond to it the same. Further, there are different strains of marijuana which have different properties, further making it difficult to give a single answer. When considering all of the information, when asked if smoking weed will help build a better mind-muscle connection, our conclusion would be, maybe it will, maybe it won't, and maybe it will actually cause a decrease. Now, smoking weed is not like having a coffee before a workout to see if it helps. If it were coffee and you were interested, we would say to go ahead and try and see what happens. That is not what we are going to tell you in this video. We are simply coming to the conclusion that smoking weed does seem to help some people establish a better mind-muscle connection and promote an intense workout per personal reports. On the other hand, some people see no effect. And still, there are others who have a bad reaction to smoking weed before a workout. Whether it's an increased heart rate, anxiety, laziness, or lack of endurance, legalization of weed has been spreading all across the United States at a very high rate. And this doesn't just include medicinal use, but recreational use as well. Along with this has come a higher interest in its use for almost everything. It seems that in just about every area of our life, someone claims, weed can make it better. Sleep, diet, cancer, sex, studying, headaches, depression, everything. As such, it only makes sense that people would wonder if they could use the effects of weed to help improve their performance and build muscles. However, some people are also concerned about its interactions with other supplements such as creatine. Creatine is the most widely used supplement on the market, meaning a lot of people are using it. It's known for its proven ability to increase size, strength, and overall performance with its use. However, in order for creatine to work, you need to be able to absorb it. Will the effects of smoking weed affect your body's ability to absorb creatine? You may be surprised about the truth of weed and creatine. What do you get when you mix the most popular drug on the planet with the most popular supplement? Watch to find out. And more importantly, have you been killing your creatine gains? Before we can get into the more specifics of how or if smoking weed affects the absorption of creatine, we should step back for a minute or two. We first need to find out how they interact with the body independent of one another first before we can fully understand if they interact with one another. Let's start with creatine. We have spoken a ton about creatine as it's all the rage these days. You know how we feel about it. If you're not taking it, you're missing out. There may be a good chance you have heard of this, but we're still going to go over what it is and how it affects your body. So, creatine is a non-proteinogenic amino acid, meaning it's not involved in the structure of protein. Still, it's a vital compound your body requires. Its primary job is its role in synthesizing the high-energy compound known as ATP. ATP stands for adenosine triphosphate, meaning it has 3 phosphates attached and is the body's energy currency. It's required to help power every muscle contraction, making it essential that your body has an adequate supply. In order for your body to sustain its supply of creatine, your body can either synthesize it internally or you consume it through your diet. And no, it's not found in weed. In fact, it's only found in animal products, especially red meat and fish. When consumed, it goes through a process where a phosphate compound is attached to it, and then the vast majority, 95%, is stored in the muscles, while the other 5% is stored in the brain or testes. When your muscle requires energy to power a contraction, one of the 3 phosphates attached to ATP breaks off, releasing energy. This also results in another compound known as ADP, adenosine diphosphate, which now only has 2 phosphates. Now the problem is that ADP is low energy and isn't able to supply any more energy. Therefore, when needed, creatine phosphate is released and goes through a reaction to release the phosphate compound so that it can attach to the ADP to become another molecule of ATP. Another part of this reaction is a byproduct known as creatinine. Creatinine is a commonly measured compound in the blood to test the health and function of the kidneys. You might not think it, but this is actually going to be important. You'll want to hear this. Yet another compound you'll need to be familiar with is an enzyme known as creatine kinase. Creatine kinase is an enzyme that's involved in transfer of a phosphate compound to creatine to become the stored version creatine phosphate. Generally, muscles that are more active will have higher levels of creatine kinase. Remember this as well. With that said, under normal conditions, most people walk around with their creatine stores at about 60% to 80% full. Therefore, they will supplement with creatine to fill their stores up to 100%. As a result, when these people go to the gym, they have more creatine, which allows for more production of ATP, which means more work can be performed, which equals greater muscle and strength gains over time. Now let's look at weed. At its core, weed is the slang term for the cannabis plant. It's a psychoactive compound that acts on the central nervous system upon use, usually through inhalation, by way of one of its many psychoactive compounds, including a group known as cannabinoids. Of the dozens of the cannabinoids that exist within cannabis, the primary one, which is responsible for most of its psychoactive effects, is known as tetrahydrocannabinol, better known as THC. Within your central nervous system are numerous cannabinoid receptors. The main receptors are CB1 receptors, which are primarily found in the brain but also in the lungs, liver, and kidneys, and CB2 receptors, which are primarily found in the immune system. Upon smoking, the cannabinoids in marijuana will interact with these receptors, resulting in the high. What's interesting about marijuana is that depending on the strain used, an individual can experience a completely different high. With that said, a typical high is a mixture of pain relief, relaxation, feeling goofy, sedated, and even euphoria. Cool, but what does this have to do with creatine? Let's first take a look at the 2 compounds we spoke about before, creatinine and creatine kinase. There have been some claims before that heavy marijuana use can cause an increase in these compounds, which could be problematic with creatine use. Allegedly. As mentioned, creatinine is found as a byproduct of the creatine phosphate, providing the phosphate compound for ATP. It also acts as a common biomarker to measure the function of the kidneys. In the past, creatine use has been reported to be damaging to the kidneys, resulting in higher creatinine levels. First off, these claims are not true, at least to the extent made in these reports. There have been case studies where people who have already damaged kidneys had higher levels of creatinine after creatine use, but this would make sense. Creatine use does work the kidneys a bit more, so if they're already damaged, it would result in higher levels. However, to date, there have been numerous long-term and short-term studies that have shown no side effects in healthy individuals when taking creatine. But with this in mind, there have also been some concerns that using marijuana can cause an increase in creatinine levels. However, most studies have shown this to be a non-issue. For example, in 2018, there was a large cross-sectional study released that used almost 14,000 adults from age 18 to 59 years of age throughout the years of 2007 and 2014. The goal of the study was to establish any relation between marijuana use, creatinine levels, and odds of having chronic kidney disease. But they found none. Following the study, they reported, "We did not observe any clinically significant association between current or past self-reported marijuana use and measures of kidney function." So in reality, it doesn't seem as though either of these two substances has a negative effect on your creatinine levels or your kidney function. Now, if both of these did cause a rise in your creatinine levels, then you may have a problem. Using two compounds that increase your creatinine levels would signal you are overworking your kidneys and could result in developing renal failure. In a similar claim, it's been suggested that marijuana use can cause an increase in creatine kinase levels. Unfortunately, there's not a whole lot of information on this relationship either. However, there is one study which has shown a relationship: high marijuana use has been found to increase the amount of creatine kinase levels. Now, it should be noted that this study specifically studies marijuana users who actually smoke so much they experience psychosis. If you're smoking that much, we think you're probably dealing with another set of issues bigger than any possible interactions with creatine. However, this still doesn't necessarily relate to the absorption of creatine. One area which marijuana may help with the absorption of creatine is with the munchies. One of the most well-known side effects of marijuana is the very unscientific term, the munchies. This refers to the common urge to eat food, usually heavy carbs and fat. Scientists aren't exactly sure why this takes place, but they believe it to have something to do with THC's interaction with the olfactory systems. When these systems are activated, the individual will have stronger reactions to the smell of food, which can trigger an insatiable appetite. But as mentioned, this is likely just part of the equation. But what does this have to do with creatine? Well, when we consume creatine, it must be absorbed into our muscles. Studies have shown that the increased consumption of food will result in a greater amount of creatine being absorbed. If you have issues with eating food, smoking weed can give you the motivation you need to eat to help enhance the absorption of creatine. In fact, increasing appetite is one of the medicinal uses of marijuana for those with various conditions such as cancer. Now, eating more food to absorb creatine is definitely not the same as doing it for cancer. However, if you are a light eater, increasing your intake could help improve creatine absorption. With that said, this definitely wouldn't be a negative response though. The main problem is there seems to be very little information on any interactions with marijuana and creatine. In fact, when looking at these two drugs on WebMD.com drug interaction page, searching cannabis and creatine leads to 0 results. Now, this doesn't mean there aren't negative interactions, it simply means that there is no information on it, at least in scholarly sources. There does seem to be a lot of information or misinformation regarding these two substances anecdotally in internet forums. A major one is that creatine causes your muscles to absorb water while smoking marijuana dehydrates you. Therefore, when you take this together, you can become dangerously dehydrated. Let's break this up and look at them separately. Does creatine dehydrate you? It's true that when you consume creatine, it will draw water into your muscles. However, this does not lead to what we call dehydration. In fact, having muscles full of water is a good thing. In fact, numerous studies have examined this claim. They found that not only does creatine not result in dehydration or cramping, athletes who take creatine have less dehydration-related conditions and even better performance. Now let's look at marijuana. People assume that marijuana dehydrates them as it can cause you to feel thirsty and dry your throat. This even has a term that smokers use, cotton mouth. While this does occur, it's not necessarily dehydration. When you smoke weed, THC interacts with the submandibular glands in the mouth. These glands are responsible for producing saliva, and THC turns them off. This means your mouth can't produce saliva, thus drying out your mouth and causing the sensation of being dehydrated. But you're not dehydrated, therefore, as neither of these compounds cause you to become dehydrated, using them together isn't going to make you dehydrated. With that said, it's always a good idea to be mindful of your hydration levels. Other than this, many of the claims about creatine and marijuana seem to come out of left field with zero reason to believe there's any truth. We're talking about claims that the two compounds can make you throw up, increase chances of psychosis, panic attacks, and other claims. There's no way to tell what to make of these claims or why that would even occur. Given the fact these claims are often paired with other pieces of misinformation, we wouldn't take it seriously. Now, we can also consider the fact that a surprising amount of athletes smoke weed. There is no exact number, especially regarding bodybuilders, but there's evidence that seems to suggest use of weed is more prevalent in the athletic community. Further, those who smoke more tend to train more. So what does this have to do with creatine? Well, creatine is the most widely used sports supplement worldwide. Anywhere from 9% to 46% of athletes are using creatine at any given time. This means there must be a relatively large amount of crossover. Also, let's remember that Arnold Schwarzenegger and Lou Ferrigno smoked a joint together in Pumping Iron, the classic bodybuilding documentary. Point being is if there were serious ill effects that weed hampered one's training, we would probably hear more stories about bad side effects. This is obviously speculation, but it's something to consider when trying to determine if these two drugs are bad for one another. So let's ask the theoretical question, what if? What if you smoked weed during your training program? Would it even help you apart from any effect with creatine? This is yet another area where studies are lacking, although it doesn't seem so, at least in a significant manner. Numerous reviews have come to this conclusion, such as this one from 2017. It compared the results of 15 studies and concluded weed offers no advantageous benefit for strength or aerobic performance. In fact, it may even decrease strength if anything. Smoking weed before training time is especially frowned upon. Researchers have found numerous performance deficits, including reduced ability to maintain effort or physical maximal work capacity, increased heart rate, breathing rate, and oxygen demand. In addition, balance and agility can be hindered. So why would an athlete partake? Well, it seems that if there are any legitimate benefits of smoking weed, it comes after training. This is particularly the analgesic effects as general relation for recovery. It could also help improve sleep quality if that's an issue. Research on weed and performance is still in its infancy. This is somewhat surprising due to the prevalence of its use, but could be due to ethical concerns as its use has just recently become legalized. Therefore, we'll probably need to wait another couple years to start seeing any questions. We have got bona fide answers concerning weed and performance. With all this said, it goes back to the main point of this video. Does smoking weed affect the absorption of creatine or affect its role on muscle growth? In the beginning of the video, we said you'd be surprised. Well, we were surprised by how such little information there actually is. Unfortunately, there's not, especially in this specific context. Therefore, we are not able to say that smoking cannabis definitely doesn't affect supplementation of creatine. However, after considering all the information that we can, there's no reason to believe that smoking weed would affect your creatine supplementation. To be clear, this doesn't mean it will help or magnify any benefits either. It seems that these two compounds act independently for the most part and won't interact with one another. We think it's important to remember that we are always consuming creatine all the time. In the beginning of the video, we discussed what creatine is and why we supplement with it. Assuming you eat meat, you are consuming creatine without supplementing. Supplementing is just helping give you a little extra. Therefore, it seems that if we did affect the absorption of creatine, it would likely have an effect wherever its source is. Regardless, let's keep in mind that a large portion of people taking creatine are probably also smoking weed. Considering that 80% of creatine users see results, it's safe to assume that this includes weed users. Many want to train their glutes to look good. Well, we're here to tell you there's worse things that can occur from small, weak glutes other than not filling out your jeans. We're talking about poor posture, sore backs, tight hamstrings, the development of Trendelenburg gait, or even gluteal amnesia. Trendelin what? And what did your butt forget? We'll explain what all this means in this video, but it all stems from having weak glutes. Better yet, because we believe strong glutes are so important, we're also going to give you 3 steps to strengthen your glutes. We're going to include a full program including mobility and strengthening exercises. Unfortunately, weak glutes are a common symptom among the modern population and are becoming more common every day. We are currently living in a world that is rapidly becoming more sedentary. Just a few years ago, the average person reported watching TV for 2 hours a day. Now, it's 4.3. Latest studies show Americans sit almost 10 hours every day. While a lot of this can be due to the way many jobs operate these days, a surprising 82% of people's leisure time is spent sitting. They could be doing anything, like training their glutes, but they choose to sit. Well, we're glad you're here and that you decided to take action against this epidemic. Because even if we set our glutes aside for a minute, sitting this much brings in a host of very serious chronic health complications which are linked to an increased all-cause mortality. Now, in terms of your glutes, sitting so much and having inactive glutes can actually cause them to forget how to operate, a condition known as gluteal amnesia. When gluteal amnesia kicks in, your body will not function properly, yet you won't even realize it. This is because other muscles will be forced to kick in and compensate for glute inactivity, hiding the issue unless you look for it. This process will continue until you make a conscious decision to stop and reverse it. And that's what this video is about. So what are your glutes supposed to do? In short, a lot. Your glutes are the literal powerhouse of your body. Not only does it power every type of locomotion, it helps build a solid foundation so that your body can perform both upper and lower body movements. For example, when performing an overhead press, a common cue is to clench the glutes, which will contribute to torso stability. In other words, strong glutes equals strong pressing power. What do the glutes have to do with pressing? Well, your glutes are actually part of an intricate set of muscles known as your posterior chain and lay smack dab in the middle. This posterior chain runs from your neck all the way down your ankles and acts as a flexible support system which controls and braces the entire body. As your glutes lay in the middle, they're especially important and act as a hinge that connects the upper body to the lower body. It basically acts as a hinge for your entire body and is where all movement is derived. Imagine trying to jump or walk without bending at the hips. Not happening. This also makes hip extension its primary function. Hip extension occurs when the hips open up from a closed position or small angle, such as performing a deadlift. However, it also performs hip extension isometrically, meaning it holds the body and the torso in position and keeps it from flexing or bending over. This is crucial to perform any type of power movement, such as a baseball swing or punch. Even overhead pressing requires strong glutes. If your glutes are weak, they're unable to keep the torso pulled back during sitting or walking and results in lower back pain and a host of other issues. We'll go over the rest of your glutes function throughout the video, so be sure to watch it all. We're also going to help you identify if you have inactive glutes, how to activate them, and how to strengthen them. We're going to have all this together in a simple plan, so weak glutes will just be something you watch videos on. Let's get started. Before we start our three-part process, we first need to decide if this is an issue for you to begin with. To do this, we're going to use two tests. The first way to test this is to perform a single leg glute bridge. Lay flat on the ground with your legs extended. Bend one knee up until the shin is sitting vertical to the floor. You will then thrust your hips into the air while keeping the other leg raised from the floor and extended. Thrust all the way up until your hips are fully extended. This is going to require you to perform hip extension, its primary function. Specifically, this occurs when the hips go from its flexed position at the bottom of the movement to a more open position at the top of the position. So your first indicator is how easy this is for you to perform. You should be able to perform a perfect glute bridge relatively easily. If not, you likely have at least a weak pair of glutes or inactive glutes, or both. Can you hold it? That's great, but there can still be issues. We discussed the posterior chain earlier, so we know that hip extension doesn't occur with the glutes alone. At the same time, your knee is also extended during this movement, which can activate the quadriceps as well. Basically, there's a lot going on with this movement, and it can be hard to feel your glutes. In this video, we will teach you how to isolate the glutes with this same movement, but for now, we want to see how your muscles fire naturally. So hold this position at the top and pay attention to where you primarily feel the burn. Ideally, you will feel your glutes working the most, as they should be the primary mover. This would be a good indicator that your bum is firing properly. However, if you feel fatigue in any other muscles, such as your hamstrings or quads, it's an indicator that these muscles are overcompensating due to inactivity of your glutes. After this test, you can move to your second, the single leg jump. To perform the single leg jump, bend one leg at the knee to raise the foot up behind the body. When ready, you will lean over slightly and then explosively propel yourself up into the air and land down on the same leg. During the movement, you're looking for two different indicators of glute function. You first want to track the hips. Another important function of your hips is its role in stability, especially when balancing on one foot. Specifically, this is the job of the gluteus medius, the muscle on the side of your butt. If you've ever stood on one foot and felt your glutes burn, this is what's going on. Now, remember when we talked about the Trendelenburg gait? Well, this is a condition caused by the inability of the gluteus medius to keep the hips level while you're walking. As a result, the hips sag to the unsupported side, which results in improper firing of your muscles and overcompensation by surrounding muscles. It also puts strain on the hip joints and can cause a slew of issues in your hips and knees. Therefore, watch your hips during the initial lift-off and during the landing. Ideally, your glutes are strong enough to keep your hips level during both sections of the movement. On the other hand, if your hips sink, it's a good indicator your glutes need some love. You also want to make sure there is no buckling of the knee inward during either part of the test. This is known as knee valgus and can also indicate inactive glutes. If you passed both tests, then congratulations. You probably don't need to go through the first couple of steps, but it can still be beneficial to train your glutes. However, if you fail either one, we'll need to go back to the basics. And don't get down if you need to restrain them. Remember the classic, 2 steps forward, 1 step back, or in our case, 1 step back, 2 steps forward. Keep that in mind as we progress. We're now going to show you how to reverse the problem and strengthen your glutes so that they can do what they're supposed to do efficiently. Let's get into it. Let's start with step 1. Your very first job is to check the mobility of the hips and fix it if necessary. Mobility refers to a joint's ability to move freely through a full range of motion. In your case, we are particularly concerned with your hip joint, as this is the joint that the glutes control. If you have poor mobility, you will be unable to place your body in the correct position so that your muscles can function and fire correctly. As a result, the glutes won't function properly, and you'll experience loss in either performance or health, or both. Now, as the hip joint is so complex, there are a lot of areas that could be hindering your mobility. However, due to the widespread epidemic of too much sitting, the primary problem for many people are tight hip flexors. Tight hip flexors can inhibit the glutes' ability to create strength and need to be lengthened and relaxed. With that said, before we go any farther, you need to start increasing your activity levels. Remember that your tight hip flexors are likely due to too much sitting. So this is ultimately the problem you need to fix to prevent recurring issues. Keep in mind that this doesn't necessarily mean it must be intense exercise, it simply means being active. Take your dog for a longer walk. Listen to a podcast while walking rather than watch TV. Walk to the store if it's close enough. Literally anything that gets you on your feet will help significantly. If you do have a sedentary job, make conscious efforts to move more. Take the stairs has become a bit of a cliche, but it's true. Also, getting up every hour and doing a little walk is great as well. Now that you know you want to move more, let's continue with this first part. So, your hip flexors are located on the anterior side of the body and are responsible for flexing the hips. However, prolonged inactivity, especially sitting, can lead to tight hip flexors. Tight hip flexors will inhibit the glutes' ability to contract, as they will not lengthen appropriately. Basically, the flexors and extensors will play a type of tug-of-war, and your flexors will win. That is, unless you address the problem. A quick test can be performed called the kneeling hip extension test. Get on your hands and knees facing away from a wall. Place the top of one foot up on the wall, and then begin to scoot back until your foot is nearly touching your hips. Now bring your other foot up in front as if you were doing a lunge. Extend your hips so that your torso now moves vertically. If you're unable to do this easily or you have to bend over, you likely have a hip extension problem due to your hip flexors. If this is the case, you'll need to improve your hip mobility. We'll give you a full plan in just a minute, but remember this hip extension test as it's also going to be a part of it. Before we give you the mobility test, you can also use another passive test, the Thomas test. The Thomas test can be performed solo or with a partner. You first lay on the edge of a hard table and tuck both of your knees to your chest. In this position, your hips should come to the edge of the table. Now, keeping one knee tucked to your chest, let the other leg drop down passively. If the thigh doesn't break past 0 degrees or the knee stays above the hip, you know that you have tight hip flexors, as they do not allow the leg to drop to 0 degrees. You will follow this hip mobility program until you're able to pass these 2 mobility tests. Step 1. Glute mobility workout. 1. Warm up with an exercise of your choice. This will help warm the body and create a more flexible muscle. 2. Hip flexor rock and roll. This is a good stretch to start your hip routine. Start in a lunge position and be sure to have your torso completely upright. Slide the rear knee backward to extend the hips and then drive your hips forward and down towards your front toe. 3. Wall hip flexor stretch. This is the same as the hip extension test in the beginning of the video. Start your training with your back foot in a position that allows you to have fully extended hips. Gradually scoot your torso back towards the wall until your torso is right up against your foot. 4. Pigeon pose. Start in a raised plank position. Take a leg and pull the thigh in front of the body and the lower leg crossing the body, keeping the back leg fully extended Allow your torso to lay down across your body. Perform each exercise for 30 seconds for each leg and repeat this cycle 3 times. Recheck the tests weekly so you can measure your progress. For step 2, we're going to improve your glutes' ability to function properly. To do this, you will need to attack this problem in 2 directions. First, you will continue staying active. We're saying this again as this is a must. Now that you have your activity and mobility sorted, you will need to train your glutes how to fire properly again. A re-education camp, if you will. This will require using specific glute exercises that will force you to use your glutes. Doing so will teach you to feel them again. Large compound exercises are great, especially for building strength, and will show you the best ones. However, due to their nature, there's a lot going on with different muscles. As your glutes are just learning to fire again, we'll focus on them in a bit. With that said, the best exercises to use when you're retraining your glutes to fire are isolations. As the name implies, isolation exercises target one muscle and isolates it. For our purposes, this will make it easy for your glutes to learn to properly fire again. Not all isolation exercises are created equal though, especially the glutes. As so much is going on, some isolations make it easier to isolate the glutes. When you first begin your retraining, you want to stick to 3 exercises. These awesome exercises have been shown to be 3 of the best isolations for glutes while minimizing involvement of other muscles. The first exercise is clamshells. Clamshells are great exercises that will isolate the glutes through external rotation. Another important function of the glutes. Lay on your side with your legs on top of each other and aligned with your knees together and bent. Keeping your feet together, rotate the top knee upwards as if it's a clam opening. When you perform this exercise, it can be extremely helpful to place your hands on the top glute and feel the glute working. This helps a stronger mind-muscle connection, which we'll discuss with the next exercise. Your second exercise will be the quadruped hip extension. Get on your hands and knees with a flat back. Extend one leg back and up, maintaining a 90-degree angle throughout this motion. While you can't touch the glutes during this exercise, you can use a strong mind-muscle connection that we just talked about. The mind-muscle connection refers to the body's ability to increase the activation of a muscle by thinking about it with intent. This simple behavior has been shown to increase activation, which in our context will help isolate the glutes. And for the third one, place a band around your ankles and step laterally in one direction for 5 to 10 steps. Then switch directions and step the other way. Perform all of these 3 times a week unloaded until you're able to fire your glutes properly. These are all bodyweight exercises, so you can easily do these at home. Retest yourself by going back to the single leg glute bridge test to see if you can feel the activation move back towards your glutes. Once you're able to confidently perform this movement with only feeling activation in your glutes, throw in the single leg Romanian deadlift. This is a bit more advanced, but will not only isolate the glutes but start to strengthen them a little bit more. As you pull your body up, remember to use your mind-muscle connection to power your glutes so they drive your hips forward. Remember, your goal is to use your glutes, so really concentrate on this. Step 2, glute re-education. Clamshells, 3 sets of 10 reps. Quadruped hip extension, 3 sets of 10 reps. Banded side step, 3 sets of 5 to 10 reps. Single leg Romanian deadlift, 3 sets of 10 reps. Test yourself with the single leg jump and track the same indicators. If your hips remain level and if your knee caves inward. Once this becomes easy, you're strong enough to move on to step 3. One more step to go. After your glutes have learned to fire again, it's time to start placing greater demands on them. However, we don't want to jump straight into movements like back squats just yet, as there's a lot going on. Step-ups and side step-ups are both great choices. They both involve stepping up to a higher surface and using your leg to pull your body weight up. As the movement is similar, alternate between these every workout. With the step up, you step up to a higher surface in front of you, which primarily uses hip extensions. At the same time as you're lifting on a single leg, it will also require stability in your hip by way of glute activation. Lift one foot and place it firmly on an elevated surface. You will then pull your body up by driving your raised leg down. Now the side step up consists of stepping to an elevated surface laterally. Stand with your side facing the box. You then perform a similar motion as the step up in this position. Therefore, in addition to extension, you are forcing the body to perform hip abduction to a much greater degree as well to keep the body from sagging. This is important. For both of these movements, concentrate on prioritizing the leg pulling the body up. Your body's natural inclination will be to use the leg on the ground to help propel your body. It can be very difficult to completely neutralize this movement, but you want to mitigate it as much as you can. Again, be intentional with all these movements. We're then going to go back to where it all started with the barbell glute bridge. In the beginning of the video, we said we would show you how to isolate the glutes during the glute bridge, and here we are. When you perform the bridge, push your feet outwards, as if you're going to extend your knees. This will load your quadriceps, which will mitigate the activity of the hamstrings due to a phenomenon known as reciprocal inhibition. If you think about it, two opposing muscles can't flex at the same time unless you're doing it intentionally to perform an isometric hold. For example, if you flex your biceps, your triceps must relax and vice versa. After the barbell glute bridge, your barbell hip thrust is the next in progression. In fact, the barbell hip thrust is thought to be the best glute exercise in general. Not only can you load with significant weight, it actually acts as an isolation. Now, technically the knees are bent, which can involve the quadriceps, but the glutes are the primary mover by far, so long as they're firing properly. However, use weights that are appropriate for you. If you attempt to use heavy loads too soon, you will not be able to perform the exercise with the proper movement pattern, which completely negates this whole process. Therefore, when you start, go no lower than the 8 to 10 rep range on any of these exercises, and then increase your load on a weekly basis from there if you feel up to it. Step 3. Glute-centric workout. You'll continue with some of the previous exercises as it never hurts to keep your glutes in check. However, now you'll start using weights with these exercises. We'll also be adding in some compound exercises, and remember to always maintain a mind-muscle connection. Remember, you will alternate the lateral step up and step up. In addition, as the single-leg glute bridge and single-leg Romanian deadlift are similar as well, you will alternate these every session too. For all 4 of these exercises, utilize dumbbells to load if possible. Warm up, stair climber 10 to 15 minutes. Barbell hip thrust, 3 sets of 8 reps. Lateral step up or step up, 3 sets of 8 reps. Single-leg glute bridge or single-leg Romanian deadlift, 3 sets of 10 reps. Clamshell, 2 sets of 15 reps. Quadruped hip extension, 2 sets of 15 reps. Have you heard of creatine? Of course you have. At least you have if you've listened to our channel for any length of time. The reason we talk about it so much is because we love it, and it's essentially the most effective supplement on the market, or so we say. We decided it's time to give creatine its own video, dig into the finer details of this amazing compound, and answer the big question, does creatine actually build muscle? While it's only come to be popular among athletes since the 1990s, creatine has been around for much longer. Much longer. In fact, creatine was first discovered way back in 1832 by the French philosopher and scientist Michel-Eugène Chevreul. From there, it went through a long process of discoveries building off one another. For example, in 1847, the German chemist Justus von Liebig discovered that wild animals have more creatine in their muscles than their domestic cousins. This led to the conclusion that the levels of activity influenced the amount of creatine produced. So even 180 years ago, we knew creatine had an important relationship to physical activity. Supplementation was then found to increase creatine stores in animals in 1912, and eventually used for humans the first time in 1926. By the 1950s, it was clear that supplementation definitely had a positive effect on the human body. Then in the 1990s, athletes learned that they could get a competitive edge by taking creatine, and it's estimated that 80% of the athletes in the 1996 Atlanta Olympics supplemented with it. From there, its popularity and effectiveness have only grown. It's now one of the very few supplements that the majority of experts say athletes and lifters should use. With that said, we want to ask you, have you ever actually looked at the studies behind its use? Or have you ever heard a more detailed explanation of what exactly creatine is, or why we even supplement with it? Well, you're going to now. The rest of this video is dedicated to the inner workings of creatine, so you can know the mechanisms behind the emergence of creatine as the most effective supplement on the market. In order to fully comprehend why creatine works in building muscle, notice we said why, not if it works, you need to know how it works. Understanding the mechanism is paramount to understanding its effectiveness. There's quite a bit going on, but trust us, once you fully understand it, you'll have no question if it builds muscle. Let's dig in. So the first thing you need to understand is that creatine is not a steroid or anything like that. In fact, it's not even a foreign substance. Right now, you and every single person has creatine in their body. In fact, if you didn't, you wouldn't be able to function at all. We'll get into that later, so let's move on with how it works. As we now know, creatine isn't a steroid, so what is it? Well, it's a non-proteinogenic amino acid, an amino acid that's not used in the formation of protein. While it's not used to form protein, it still has very special duties, as you'll soon see, but we'll tell you it has to do with building muscle. Due to its physiological role, the body will collect creatine in its natural stores through one of two pathways. The first pathway is through our diet. Creatine is only found in animal products, primarily red meat and fish. If you're an omnivore, meaning you eat meat and plants, about 50% of your stores will be collected this way through your diet. So what about vegans? Well, vegans will typically have significantly lower stores than meat eaters, as they're stuck with only the second pathway to fill their stores, the internal synthesis of creatine from the amino acids methionine, glycine, and arginine in the liver. Regardless, either from your diet or internal synthesis, creatine is then transported to your stores within your body. About 95% is stored in your muscles, with the remaining 5% being stored in the brain and testes. However, before it's stored, creatine goes through a reaction that adds a phosphate molecule, changing it into a compound known as phosphocreatine. It's this addition of the phosphate that makes creatine so important. Before we go further, we need to talk about another compound, adenosine triphosphate, or ATP for short. ATP is known as your body's energy currency. It's responsible for providing energy for every single muscle contraction. As its name implies, adenosine triphosphate contains 3 phosphate compounds. When energy is required, one of these phosphate molecules will break off, which releases energy that can be used for muscle contraction. The problem here is that you have a finite amount of ATP, and every time an ATP molecule loses a phosphate to provide energy, it leaves a compound known as ADP, or adenosine diphosphate. The di indicates that it now only has 2 phosphate groups, so now it's not capable of providing energy. Remember what we said about a phosphate group being added to creatine? Well, you can probably guess why that's important now. When energy is required fast, the phosphate group from the phosphocreatine breaks off, and it will donate it to a molecule of ADP, thus creating another molecule of ATP. Here, we need to note that this process specifically happens to provide energy for high-intense anaerobic events, such as lifting weights and sprinting. When it comes to aerobic training, there are other mechanisms to resynthesize ATP which are beyond the scope of this video. So in short, when energy is needed fast, the stored phosphocreatine is used to supply a phosphate molecule to ADP to form ATP, which can then be used for energy. The thing is, just like our ATP, our creatine stores are also finite. Think of it like a gas tank. Depending on your diet, the average person's creatine stores are only 60 to 80% full. When creatine is used, this level drops, thus limiting your body's ability to continue performing high-intense events and forcing your body to slow down. And so, we have now arrived at why we supplement with creatine. By taking a creatine supplement, we're able to fill up our creatine stores to 100%. Having full creatine stores then allows us to perform more work in the gym. This equates to performing a couple more reps or the ability to add a little more weight. It basically allows us to increase our work volume. Now imagine if you could go to the gym and add 5 to 10 kilograms to your lifts, or add a couple reps to all your lifts. What would happen? You'd get bigger and stronger. So it's this extra work that full creatine stores allow by way of greater energy that is then translated into more muscle, greater strength gains, and improvements in general athletic performance. Dr. Richard Kreider, the leading expert on creatine supplementation, summarizes the benefits of creatine supplementation, saying you can see the following benefits. Quote, improve maximal power and strength 5 to 15%, work performed during sets of maximal effort muscle contractions 5 to 15%, single effort sprint performance 1 to 5%, and work performed during repetitive sprint performance 5 to 15%. So in a nutshell, creatine works by providing the body with a greater ability to synthesize more fuel to perform more work, which translates into greater adaptations. Simple and effective. As you can see, creatine supplementation works because creatine works. It's like saying that filling up your gas tank before taking a drive will allow you to drive further. There's no debate, it just does. While we could stop there, there are actually more mechanisms by which creatine works. For example, it's been found that creatine supplementation can improve satellite cell signaling. Satellite cells are a type of specialized stem cell located on the periphery of muscle fibers, which is what gives them their names. Studies have shown that they play a key role in the growth, repair, and regeneration of skeletal muscle. Therefore, satellite cell signaling simply refers to an increase in the capability to communicate with each other, which in turn leads to better muscle recovery and growth. As creatine improves this signaling, the body's able to synthesize muscle more efficiently. In addition, creatine also increases cell hydration. Now, this one needs explanation, as a common criticism is that creatine makes you gain water weight. In truth, it does. However, this is actually a good thing. Let's keep in mind that your muscles are 75% water. What this means is that a bigger muscle is obviously going to hold more water. While there might be some water retention in the first week or so, in the long term, as your muscles grow, water retention is evened out in proportion to your muscle gain. This review from 2022 sums it up by saying, while there is some evidence to suggest that creatine supplementation increases water retention, primarily attributed to increases in intercellular volume, over the short term, there are several other studies suggesting it does not alter total body water, intra or extracellular, relative to muscle mass over long periods of time. More importantly, a hydrated cell is more anabolic. The exact mechanisms aren't fully understood, but researchers know the swelling of a cell signals anabolic growth. Therefore, creatine increases the hydration of the muscles, which then creates a more anabolic environment, which means bigger muscles. Yet another mechanism, creatine has also been found to be responsible for lowering myostatin levels. Myostatin is a protein that's in charge of regulating muscle growth, specifically by inhibiting it. In other words, having higher myostatin levels means less ability to grow muscle. However, as creatine lowers myostatin levels, it increases your body's ability to grow muscle. And we're not done yet. There's also evidence that creatine reduces protein breakdown as well as increasing the anabolic hormone IGF-1, insulin-like growth factor. Now, let's look closer at what all this means for you. For starters, creatine supplementation can improve your recovery. If you're a regular viewer of our channel, you'll know how often we speak about the importance of recovery, as it's one of the primary indicators of how much work you can do. If you can recover faster, you can do more work and see better results. Creatine does improve recovery, which actually happens through several mechanisms. After intense exercise, your body's glycogen stores will largely be depleted. In order to recover faster, it's imperative for you to restore these levels ASAP, and this is what creatine does. When taken with large amounts of carbohydrates, 50 to 90 grams, creatine will cause a better absorption of glucose. At the same time, it'll help maintain muscle glycogen levels during exercise. This is also one of the mechanisms by which creatine can help maintain performance levels during the initial phases of high-volume training, especially when compared to no supplementation. This allows you to perform more work, which again means more muscle. Working in unison with this is the fact that creatine also has been shown to decrease inflammatory markers. All of these work together to improve the recovery of athletes so they can work more. Another awesome benefit, especially for those who train in warm climates, is that it helps increase the tolerance to heat. Actually, this is another benefit that comes by way of the extra cell swelling. The extra hydration reduces the body's thermoregulatory and cardiovascular responses. For example, those who supplement with creatine while training in heat experience a lower sweat rate and lower internal temperatures. Still, these benefits can be seen to some degree in anybody who trains with high intensity. If you get hot while training, creatine can help. So now that you understand how it works and more of its mechanisms, we can take a closer look at what type of effect it has on the body. Probably the main reason people take creatine is to increase muscle mass. Interestingly, one of the older studies from 1999 has some of the most impressive results. It showed that when combined with a resistance training program, muscle fibers see 2 to 3 times more growth than without. Since then, we've had a plethora of new studies. After long-term supplementation, the average creatine user still gains about twice as much muscle mass when compared to non-users. This equates to an extra 2 to 4 kilograms. And to be clear, this is lean body mass, not just weight gain. It's pretty clear why this is. When we look at muscle hypertrophy, the greatest indicator of muscle growth is an increase in total volume. In fact, there is a clear dose response. As creatine allows more work, you can perform more volume and see more muscle growth. Due to its mechanisms, creatine is also highly effective at increasing strength, power, and general performance variables. In terms of strength, you can expect to see results pretty quickly, like in less than 2 weeks. Some users will see an added increase of 15% in their strength, while the average can expect to see an increase of 8%. We should note these gains seem to improve intermittent types of activities. As you're likely planning on using creatine for longer than 2 weeks, let's look at the long-term effects. First, in contrast to short-term, Taking creatine long-term seems to allow a trainee to increase their overall work capacity through an extended period of time. The strength seems to include both maximal strength values and muscle endurance. For example, a group of powerlifters saw a significant increase in their 3-repetition maximum or 3RM bench press. The control group still saw significant increases in their 3RM by 2.5 kilograms. However, the creatine group saw an increase of 8.9 kilograms. In addition, the creatine group saw a 37% increase in maximum repetitions of 85% of their 3RM, while the control didn't even see a significant change. In another study, 19 resistance-trained men followed a 12-week training program, with half using creatine supplementation. At the end of the study, the creatine group saw a significantly greater increase across numerous tests. For example, they saw a greater increase in bench press of 24% versus 16%, as well as squats of 32% versus 24%. It was also found that the creatine group saw a greater increase in the cross-sectional areas of type 1 muscle fibers, 35% versus 11%, type 2A muscle fibers, 36% versus 15%, and type 2AB, 35 versus 6%. At the same time, they also saw a greater increase in total gains of lean muscle mass, 6.3% versus 3.1%. We could go on, as the vast majority of studies on creatine see similar results. You should also understand that these increased adaptations transfer into an increase in actual athletic performance. To date, creatine has been tested on a plethora of athletes competing in very different sports. This includes resistance training, elite soccer training, canoe basic training, and plyometric training. Performance in all of these sports saw significant improvements. In terms of widespread consensus that creatine is an effective ergogenic aid, the ISSN, or International Society of Sports Nutrition, reports. Thus, a widespread consensus now exists in the scientific community that creatine supplementation can serve as an effective nutritional ergogenic aid that may benefit athletes involved in numerous sports as well as individuals involved in exercise training. But what about that one guy who said it actually doesn't work because he used it with no gains? Well, even though creatine is highly effective, there are such people as non-responders. These are people who see no benefits to creatine supplementation. The most likely cause of this is that their stores are already full due to their diet. Therefore, any extra supplementation is not absorbed as the stores are already full. The good news is that approximately 80% of people will see significant increases in creatine stores that are greater than 10%. Then 6.6% are quasi-responders, which means they'll see an increase of 5 to 10% in their stores. The remaining 13.4% are non-responders, meaning they see less than 5% improvement. So there is an 80% chance you're going to see some awesome results. As you can easily get a month's supply for less than $20, it is very worth your while. So now we know that creatine works for the large majority of people. We're going to show you how to use creatine most effectively. Now remember when we talked about what taking creatine as a supplement ultimately does. It fills our body's creatine stores. This takes time to do. You can simply do this by taking a normal dose, which is 3 to 5 grams a day. However, this can take up to a whole month. Therefore, the most common practice is to perform a loading phase. A loading phase is 5 to 7 consecutive days in which you take 20 to 25 grams of creatine throughout your day. This will fill up your stores quickly. From there, you can then simply take a maintenance dose of 3 to 5 grams a day. Now, let's get back to your loading phase. Some people might claim gastric distress or other discomfort when taking so much. However, it's usually exacerbated when taking bigger loads. Therefore, you can break the 20 to 25 grams into as small a serving as you want throughout the day. In fact, you can do this for your maintenance dose as well if needed. As far as creatine timing, it doesn't really matter when you take creatine. A meta-analysis from 2018 suggests that taking creatine immediately after training may produce larger gains in muscle mass. However, subsequent studies report there is no clear time that produce greater benefits. With that said, we do think that taking creatine post-workout may be a good idea. This mainly comes down to the recovery aspect. Remember that taking creatine with carbs and protein can enhance the absorption of muscle glycogen. As many of you are already making a protein shake, it just makes sense to go ahead and dump a serving of creatine in as well. Now let's talk about different versions of creatine. The original type of creatine to hit the market was creatine monohydrate. At the same time, this is the type of creatine the vast amount of studies that report positive results used. However, as creatine has gained more and more attention over the years in the general population, it's become a big seller. As a result, different variations have been produced, all of which claim to be superior to creatine monohydrate. Generally, that it's better absorbed. This includes creatine ethyl ester, creatine hydrochloride, and buffered creatine. They also come with a higher price tag. The problem is that as of today, there's only been a small number of studies directly comparing these to creatine monohydrate, and those that have aren't impressive at all. The majority show no significant benefit. In fact, some studies even show that monohydrate actually results in greater changes in muscle creatine content. With that said, getting a quality creatine monohydrate or micronized creatine monohydrate is all you need. With all that in mind, creatine is now being studied for its benefits that reach much farther than just improving performance in the gym. Creatine has been found to mitigate muscle atrophy from immobilization or sarcopenia in the elderly. It's also been found to be a powerful neuroprotector and can improve cognition. And we're even looking at possible benefits for brain concussions. In fact, the list goes on and will likely continue to grow. This is why we say when it comes to creatine, if you're not taking it, you're missing out. Creatine is by far the most studied and most effective supplement on the market, and there is really no comparison. There's also very little, if any, debate. Due to its vast range of uses, just about everyone, lifters and non-lifters alike, can see some benefits from taking creatine. It can be a family affair. Chick-fil-A is the most popular chicken sandwich in the USA. Year after year, it regularly comes out as the favorite chicken voted by consumers. And did you know it can also help pack on the muscle? Maybe, possibly. Or are we just trying to make ourselves feel better about eating fast food? Perhaps it's a little of both, because we love Chick-fil-A and we plan on continuing to eat there. Either way, in this video, we're going to break down the muscle-building potential of the Chick-fil-A fast food chain. We'll first determine what's needed to build muscle, how many calories are required, and what nutrients do you need. Once we know what we need, we can then research the nutrition of Chick-fil-A and determine if it delivers what your muscles need. Oh, and stick around as we're going to give you some great options on menu items you could choose to drive your growth. But first, let's get a little background on Chick-fil-A to find how its chicken sandwich has become so beloved across the country. Chick-fil-A was founded way back in 1946 by Samuel Truett Cathy. Originally, it was a fast food restaurant by the name of the Dwarf House and opened up in the Atlanta area. At this time in its infancy, it had a substantial menu, but its famous chicken sandwich hadn't been invented yet. It remained this way for 15 years until 1961, when a discovery would be made that changed the chicken sandwich game. Wanting to find an alternative to hamburgers, Cathay found a pressure fryer that was able to cook a chicken sandwich in the same time as hamburgers, and the result was delicious, and the rest was history. The restaurant slowly merged and expanded and became the Chick-fil-A we know today. At its birth, it was the first national chain to specialize in making a fast chicken sandwich, and this is how it's remained until today. Now you might equate a food being made fast as being not so tasty. You sacrifice some taste to save some time, but not Chick-fil-A. They are delicious and are routinely voted as best tasting. In fact, the primary negative complaint about Chick-fil-A has nothing to do with their food but the politics of the owner. But we won't travel down that road today. We just hope we never get to a point where we would have to boycott Chick-fil-A because we're not sure how long we could resist. Anyways, what started out as one delicious chicken sandwich evolved, and now the Chick-fil-A sandwich has grown into at least 6 types, including variations such as grilled and spicy. In addition to the chicken sandwiches, you can also dine on some salads, nuggets, or your typical sides such as fries. Over the years, Chick-fil-A has gained a reputation amongst bodybuilders, both recreational and pros. You can even find the likes of Kali Muscle chowing down. Its main draw is obviously their delicious chicken. In general, chicken is regarded as a healthier meat option than ground beef, especially the kind you may get from a fast food chain. When looking at the nutrition of different sources of meats, chicken breast is the most popular choice among lifters due to its high percentage of protein and low-fat content. At the same time, Chick-fil-A prides itself as using 100% natural whole breast meat, as well as not using any type of hormones or filler. This alone makes it very attractive for bodybuilders who are trying to get in as much protein as they can. Speaking of protein, let's dig a little deeper into what protein is and why it's so important for your muscle growth. Protein is one of your 3 macronutrients and is responsible for the repair and building of muscle. It's essentially a long chain of compounds known as amino acids, 20 to be exact. These amino acids all play various roles but are ultimately the building blocks of muscle. As such, you need to make sure you eat enough if you want big muscles. So how much protein do you need to eat? The RDA for protein is set at a measly 0.8 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight or 0.37 grams per pound of body weight. However, this number is set to give an adequate number for the majority of people on Earth to sustain a healthy life. However, bodybuilders and athletes aren't average individuals. Going to the gym and lifting weights 3 to 6 times a week causes a great deal of stress and damage that requires more protein, or at least if you want to build muscle. Therefore, the average number given for lifters is 1.6 to 2.2 grams per kilogram of body weight, or 0.73 to 1 gram per pound of body weight. This means a 200-pound man would need to eat about 200 grams of protein daily. When looking at a person's total calories, this usually comes out to being around 30%. Now, you're obviously not going to eat all these 200 grams of protein in one sitting. A basic guideline is to spread this protein out across the day in 4 to 6 servings, 3 to 4 hours apart. Ideally, these meals are of similar amounts of protein. Therefore, if you were trying to eat 200 grams in a day, each meal should contain about 30 to 50 grams of protein. In addition to protein, you're going to need a good amount of carbs to help fuel your workouts while also filling out your muscles with glycogen. If you want to maximize your muscle growth, this is not the time for low-carb diets. The good thing is that Chick-fil-A can provide plenty. Unlike protein, which has a much more specific intake, your carb intake can vary greatly. Not including low-carb diets, this will generally be anywhere from 50 to 60% of a bodybuilder's diet. Similar to your protein intake, your total carb consumption should be spread out across the day as well. The one meal that you may want to give some special attention to is your post-workout meals. After your workout, your muscles' glycogen levels have been completely diminished. Therefore, it's important to replenish these as fast as possible, so you'll want to eat some along with your protein. In the past, it was believed that you should eat a protein-to-carb ratio of 1 to 4. As your protein intake should be 30 grams of protein, your carbohydrate intake should be 120 grams. That's a lot. However, researchers now believe this can be lower, especially for recreational lifters. You may see the number go anywhere from a 1-to-1 ratio to a 1-to-3 ratio. This means that if you ate 30 grams of protein, you should eat somewhere between 30 and 90 grams of carbohydrates. So, does Chick-fil-A deliver? Could you build muscle while eating Chick-fil-A? Yes, absolutely. Putting all other nutritional concerns to the side for a minute, a meal at Chick-fil-A has plenty of protein and carbs to pack on muscle. You can easily reach your daily needs simply by eating the majority of their menu items. Many of their sandwiches have about 30 to 35 grams of protein. For example, their regular chicken sandwich packs 29 grams of protein and 420 calories. Assuming you were to only drink water and not use any of their sauces, you could theoretically only eat these to get in your protein and hit your calories. With that in mind, if your main source of protein is going to be Chick-fil-A, you will most likely be performing a dirty bulk. A dirty bulk is when a bodybuilder increases their calories significantly to promote faster muscle growth. Usually, a lifter is advised to eat a surplus of 300 to 500 calories, while 300 may be the optimal amount. This will be enough for muscle growth while not too much as to add a lot of fat. Under a dirty bulk, the lifter will eat significantly more than this. Most on a dirty bulk won't even watch their calories as long as they are eating enough protein. For this reason, we would recommend you not use Chick-fil-A as your only source of protein. Doing this could possibly bring about some nutritional deficiencies, but we will talk about this in a little bit. However, let's say you are trying to lose body fat or are trying to run a body recomposition. Are you still going to be able to eat at Chick-fil-A? Yep, Chick-fil-A has a couple of high-protein, low-calorie food choices, specifically the grilled Chick-fil-A nuggets. The nuggets pack a crazy 25 grams of protein per serving at just 130 calories. This comes out to being 77% of calories from protein. To be clear, this is basically what you can expect to get from some protein powders. Now, those are the most lean options on the menu, but there are some other good choices as well. Even the regular Chick-fil-A nuggets come in at 43% protein with 27 grams of protein at 250 calories. We just mentioned that Chick-fil-A has some nutritional concerns. At least if you're only planning on eating Chick-fil-A, we wanted to address those right now. Again, this is really only an issue if you plan on only eating Chick-fil-A. The first nutritional problem that screams out is the sodium intake, which is a common criticism of eating fast food. Most of the chicken sandwiches have extremely high sodium content of 1,400 milligrams or more. Given that the recommended sodium intake is only 2,300 milligrams, this is a ton. Just 2 sandwiches will put you well over the limit, at least according to the American Heart Association. We'll get into this a bit. Eating too much sodium can cause a number of negative health effects. It can cause you to hold on to water, cause high blood pressure, headaches, and lead to heart disease. However, research out of University of California, Davis has suggested a new theory concerning sodium intake. The study suggests that people will naturally seek out an appropriate amount of sodium as the brain will almost self-regulate. This means that maybe the concern about sodium may be exaggerated. Researchers monitored the sodium levels of individuals from over 45 countries for more than 50 years. Before we go further, realize that a lot has changed in 50 years. For example, the obesity levels of Western countries have skyrocketed, as well as various diseases such as diabetes. In addition, our diets have drastically morphed, as well as the rise of the fast food industry such as Chick-fil-A. At the same time, this study looked at 45 countries. These countries have drastically different diets and food sources. However, researchers found that sodium levels have remained constant for the entire period. This level is 2,622 to 4,830 milligrams per day. The bottom line is that the scare of high sodium may not necessarily be warranted if you have no underlying health conditions. Why is this so important? Well, because high sodium levels are often a major criticism of eating Chick-fil-A. Now, we're not saying sodium doesn't matter at all, but it's something to keep in mind. However, even if sodium isn't an issue, this isn't the only nutritional issue with Chick-fil-A. If you were to only eat Chick-fil-A, you would also be missing out on a lot of your essential micronutrients like vitamins and minerals. While not usually associated with muscle growth, a deficit could also affect your muscle function and muscle growth and overall health. This is why you want to eat a variety of food sources, especially including plenty of vegetables. Now, you could technically only eat Chick-fil-A sandwiches and hit your protein requirement while also eating an appropriate amount of calories. However, this would limit your food selection and leave no room for the addition of other choices. Okay, so maybe only eating Chick-fil-A isn't the best idea. The good thing is the solution is easy. Don't. Be sure to include plenty of other foods. But now let's go back to what you should eat at Chick-fil-A to build some massive muscles. One of the things we love at Chick-fil-A is that some items allow you to add a protein a la carte. This means you could instantly give your meal a protein boost of 21 grams at just 110 calories. If you're looking for a muscle-building dinner, add a side of grilled chicken nuggets to the market salad. Normally, this meal packs 550 calories with 28 grams of protein. By adding the nuggets, you're going to get 660 calories and 49 grams of protein. Due to the added almonds and salad, this is likely going to be your #1 muscle-building meal on the Chick-fil-A menu. It's high in protein, a decent selection of food sources, and low in calories. Now, what if we were to tell you that there's more to Chick-fil-A than just a dose of protein? You could also use Chick-fil-A to possibly improve your workout. While most bodybuilders think of Chick-fil-A as a post-workout meal, you could actually stop by for a pre-workout, especially if you train in the morning. Many will exaggerate the effects of training fasted and act like your muscles may just fall off. They won't under normal circumstances, however, it's still not optimal. Ideally, you can get a little bit of carbs and protein in your system to help fuel your workout, while providing the muscles with amino acids to mitigate muscle breakdown. However, eating too much can cause digestive issues for many people. So, what should you eat? One of our favorite pre-workout snacks is good Greek yogurt, like the Greek yogurt parfait at Chick-fil-A. Made with Greek yogurt, fresh berries, and granola, this treat packs 31 grams of carbs to fuel your muscles and 12 grams of protein to build them back up. But that's not it. Most people love a good pre-workout, and Chick-fil-A has our favorite, coffee. So obviously we're talking about the beautiful caffeine found in coffee. There's no need to spend a bunch of money on a fancy pre-workout, as we're going to tell you secret. The primary active ingredient in pre-workouts is simply caffeine. After examining multiple pre-workouts, research has concluded that caffeine is the most effective compound. Other ingredients may or not be beneficial, but don't come close to the value of caffeine. Caffeine is a mild stimulant that can help to mitigate time to fatigue, increase energy, decrease rate of perceived exertion. This just means workouts don't feel as hard, and that increases total workload. Newer research has even shown that it can increase strength and power output. Further, studies have shown that coffee works just as good as a caffeine pill, assuming the dosing is equal, so grab a cup or two before you hit the gym. So let's talk about your post-workout. Chick-fil-A has several great sandwiches and items that can help supply your body with carbs and protein. But before we get into that, let's first talk about some liquid calories. Chocolate milk. Yep, drinking some chocolate milk to have right after your training could be a great idea, and it's not just because it tastes good. And while it does have protein and carbs, there's still another awesome quality of it: hydration. Researchers have discovered that because of the consistency and compounds found in milk, it sits in your digestive tract longer than other liquids such as water. As a result, this allows your body to absorb more of the water that composes milk. This makes it an amazing hydration beverage. How amazing is it? Very amazing, even better than water. In fact, there are studies that even show drinking milk post-workout acts a better option for hydration than actual sports drink. Now, with that in mind, we can also acknowledge that it also does have 7 grams of protein and 23 grams of carbs per serving as well. Of course, you'll need to increase that after training, but it's not a bad start. After your milk, it's really up to you on what food item you want, which would depend on your goal and caloric needs. If you're trying to make some lean gains, you can't go wrong with the grilled Chick-fil-A nuggets we talked about earlier. However, the grilled Chick-fil-A sandwich is also a great option with 390 calories and 29 grams of protein. Eating this with a serving of milk would easily put you at 35+ grams of protein and 530 calories. This is definitely going to drive some muscle growth. Keep in mind that we have only gone over a few of the menu items from Chick-fil-A, while many others could do the trick as well. Regardless, it turns out that Chick-fil-A actually does have some muscle-building options. We definitely wouldn't suggest you only get your protein from Chick-fil-A, but it could definitely be an option once in a while. We also want to say that we are not suggesting this is the best option or healthiest, but we also believe in moderation. And so if you want to grab a Chick-fil-A sandwich after your Friday workout, you're going to be okay and can expect your body to be fully satisfied. To recap, we want to go over just a few guidelines on how to make the most out of a trip to Chick-fil-A. The first is to stay away from any of the liquids other than the milk, especially soda and diet soda. These are just empty calories and will do nothing good for you. You could maybe down some juice immediately after a post-workout, but milk is going to be your best option. Also, stay away from most of the sides, waffle fries, desserts, etc. However, there are some good options such as their fruit cup, yogurt parfait, and kale crunch side. There's also one side we want to specifically point out, the chicken tortilla soup. It brings 24 grams of protein at just 340 calories, making it an awesome snack or even a meal. Concerning the sandwiches, the best option for those on a cut will be the grilled chicken sandwich and the grilled nuggets. Or if you want to get some breakfast, check out their egg white grill. 300 calories and 28 grams of protein. All of these could essentially fit in a diet with a caloric deficit. Now, if you are on a bulk, the choices would depend on you and your caloric needs. Keep in mind to look at the salads and remember that you can add a side of grilled nuggets on top. For dressing, stick with the light Italian or light balsamic vinaigrette. Turns out that America's most beloved chicken sandwich makes a pretty awesome post-workout meal too. If we learned anything from COVID, it's that we don't need to go to the gym for an awesome workout. Well, we actually learned a lot from COVID, but that's an entirely different video. As we were all locked inside our homes with no access to the gym, our experience with at-home workouts blew up as it was our only choice. We now have a plethora of exercises in our collection, including some amazing ab workouts. This video is going to break down what we think are the best ab exercises you can do at home. We're even going to lay out an entire ab workout program at the end of this video. And to be clear, while these are at-home exercises, we do them if we have access to the gym or not. They're that effective. If you don't have access to a gym, or maybe you're just trying to save time and train at home, once in a while, these ab exercises and workout will definitely benefit your entire core. We also have a surprise for you, what we believe to be an at-home version of the best core exercise there is. We don't want to say these are exclusive, but you don't see many people talking about these, but there's more. On top of your ab workout, we're going to give you 2 bonus advanced ab exercises to give you a goal to keep working towards. It just so happens that one of these bonus exercises is a favorite for a very famous martial artist. Probably the most famous. We'll tell you who it is, so keep watching to find out. And trust us, you want his abs. The best place to start is taking a better look at your ab muscles. The only way to train a muscle and get optimal results is to train it in a way that's complementary to its function. As you could guess, abs is short for abdominal muscles. Usually clumped together as a single muscle, there's actually a lot going on around your waist. Your abs are actually composed of 4 different distinct muscles, and we actually mean they are completely different. They're not just different heads, in the way the biceps have 2 heads. Even though these muscles are distinct from each other, they will often still work together to perform various movements. At the same time, they all have their own unique function. This is crucial to understand if you want to have the best home workout for abs. Knowing their function will allow you to choose the best exercises to optimally train each one. Now, in this video, we're going to tell you the best ab workout, but we still want you to know why it's the best. So without further ado, let's introduce you to these muscles. Leading the group is the most famous of these muscles, Mr. Six-Pack himself, your rectus abdominis. The rectus abdominis is what people are speaking about most of the time they speak about their abs. In reality, when people speak about their abs, they're talking about their six-pack, or lack thereof, and it's your rectus abdominis which gives this appearance. Your six-pack appears this way as the muscle contains two columns of paired muscles connected at the midline. Now, depending on your genetics, you may have a four-pack or even an eight-pack. But don't worry, the number of packs you have makes no difference on the performance of your abs. So your rectus abdominis is the primary muscle responsible for flexing your torso. Even though it's just one muscle, it can flex the torso from two directions. First, it brings your torso down toward your hips as seen in a crunch. It can also help bring your lower torso up as seen with leg raises. Now keep this in mind as it's going to be very important once we get to your exercise selection. We'll do that in a few minutes, but now we have a few more ab muscles to get to. If you travel either left or right all the way to your sides, you'll find your next set of ab muscles, the obliques. There are actually two sets of obliques which sit on top of each other, your internal obliques underneath and your external obliques on top. These two sets of muscles have the same function with their unique purpose being lateral flexion, when your torso is bent down to the side. They're also responsible for rotating the body, such as a baseball swing. At the same time, when working with your other ab muscles, it works to add stability to your torso as well and can also assist in flexing your torso. Then there's your fourth muscle. It gets no love. You probably didn't even know you had a fourth ab muscle. It's your transverse abdominis and remains elusive to many people as it sits under your other muscles, meaning you can't see it. That's unfortunate as it's an essential part of your entire core. Also known as your corset muscle, it sits under your rectus abdominis and then wraps around your body, giving it its corset-like function. Its primary job is to help stabilize your entire torso and keep all of your innards in place. There's also another very important part of the transverse muscle. Do you know those lines that guys have which travel down the pelvis at an angle, traveling towards your nether parts? This line is known as the Adonis belt and is thought to be the sexiest muscle on a man. Here's the thing, it's not a muscle. The Adonis belt is actually two tendons that protrude outwards on those with strong abs and low body fat. Specifically, these ligaments run over your transverse muscle. This means that when you build up this ab muscle, it will push this ligament upwards and make your Adonis belt more pronounced. It just so happens we have an awesome exercise to do this, and we'll tell you about that in a bit. So now, before we go over your workout, we first need to go over the exercises. Here are the best exercises to use for your home ab workout. Before we get into your strength exercises, we want to spend time strengthening up your core stability and mobility. For that, we have two awesome exercises. The first is one known as a dead bug, named so as you'll start the exercise looking like a dead bug. Lay on your back and stick your arms straight up while lifting your knees and tucking them in so that your thighs are vertical. It should look as if you're on your hands and knees. Now, let one arm drop straight behind your head while you drop and extend your opposite one. While you do this, keep your back planted on the ground and try to get both limbs in line. Our other favorite are bird dogs. Actually, these look very similar to dead bugs, but are just inverted and are performed on your hands and knees. While on your hands and knees, extend one arm straight out in front of you while you lift and extend the opposite leg. Focus on keeping your spine neutral and do your best to get your arm and leg fully extended. Then bring them down and repeat with the other side. Perform these every day with your core training or use them during the warm-up of a normal training day. Now, these exercises aren't difficult in the same way as a barbell rollout. However, they're very challenging as most people's motor control is all out of whack, let alone having general mobility issues in their hips. And speaking of a barbell rollout, we're going to look at these in a bit, so keep an eye out for that. So now that your mobility is in tip-top shape, let's strengthen your abs. What's awesome about these exercises is that anyone, anywhere can start this program right now. Heck, you could even start while you're watching this video. That's because we pick exercises that only require body weight. Many people wrongly assume that bodyweight exercises are inherently easy exercises, which can't be further from the truth. In fact, we love bodyweight exercises as anyone can do them, anywhere they want. At the same time, they can be extremely challenging. In fact, many people probably won't be able to do the last two bonus exercises. Remember, one's taken from the most famous martial artist in the world. Also, remember that we have an exercise that mimics one of the most challenging and effective core exercises there is. In other words, bodyweight exercises can be very challenging. But before we get to them, let's review your other exercises. We'll start by hitting your obliques with a rotational exercise. The Russian twist. Fun fact, have you ever wondered why Russian twists are called Russian twists? We did too, and so we researched it. We now know how they got this name. No one really knows. Even if no one knows why they're called this, they're still an awesome rotational ab exercise. The Russian twist first has you sit on the ground with your legs slightly bent out in front while you're leaning back. Ideally, you can lay back to at least a 45-degree angle. As mentioned, you can perform this with just your body weight, but you could also use a dumbbell or kettlebell if you have one. If you don't have any but still want to load the exercise, you can actually use anything, like a gallon of milk. This would be great as you could then drink milk after your workout. Did you know that milk has been found to be a better hydrator than water? This doesn't really have anything to do with the video, but we just find that really cool. Now, while you're holding an object, keep it close to your chest as you rotate your torso. To ensure you perform this exercise correctly, focus on turning your torso so you show your chest to both sides. It's important that you focus on rotating your entire torso, not just your shoulders. We have found that most people get better results by actually slowing down their repetitions and really concentrating on the movement. So when you perform these, do not perform them for speed. A quick way to up the intensity is to actually pull your legs off the ground. Let's move on with what has become the most famous bodyweight core exercise, the plank. The plank is an incredible exercise to use for an at-home exercise, if you do it the right way. Planks train your entire core by demanding an isometric contraction in order to maintain a straight core, like a plank of wood. They'll also get you prepared for one of the advanced exercises we'll go over in a bit. While the plank is awesome, the problem is that many people will just stay in the plank position and not move, ever. But isn't that what you're supposed to do? Yes, the movement is performed by holding your body in position. However, once you can do these for minutes, its effectiveness at building strength and muscle diminishes. They will eventually become too easy, and you won't be getting the same muscle building workout. Therefore, you don't have the best ab workout anymore, you just have an ab workout. Therefore, you must add progressions to ensure you're challenging the muscles. We'll start with the traditional plank. Even though this is the basic plank, it's still very challenging, if you do it right. To perform it, get on the ground and support your body by getting on your toes and forearm. Your hips will want to sink, and it's all up to you to keep them straight. Your goal is to maintain a perfectly aligned body. Flex your core and squeeze your glutes to keep great form. Now, this is a great core workout, but it can become too easy. Therefore, once it becomes easy to hold for 1 minute, you'll just need to make it harder. One easy way to do it is alter the width between your feet. A wider stance will make the exercise easier, while a narrower stance makes it harder. Easy? Well, easy to adjust. Bringing your feet all the way together makes this exercise significantly harder to perform. You can also use different versions. One of our favorite versions is a single arm plank. As the name implies, you use just one arm, which instantly turns this into what's called an anti-rotational exercise. This is crucial because it highlights the primary function of your core. Guess what? Your abs' primary job is not to flex your core. Think about it. As you walk around, do you flex your torso up and down all day? Of course not. You'd look crazy. Rather, you walk up straight. You see, your abs work with the rest of your core muscles to provide rigidity to your torso. This helps protect your spine as well as your internal organs. In addition, it can help protect you from any type of sudden jolts. So when you perform a single arm plank, your body will want to sag to one side and your core must resist. Another challenging version is called plank elevators. We're going to be honest, we just made that name up as we're not sure of the name, but it doesn't matter what they're called as they're awesome. This basically consists of going from a plank position to a push-up position, one hand at a time. Doing so challenges the core on multiple fronts as you'll be raising, as well as shifting your weight from left to right. The key to making this most effective is to minimize movement of your core as you're transitioning positions. Next, let's hit the lower abs with the reverse crunch. The reverse crunch is similar to the crunch, but just opposite. Instead of bringing your torso towards the hips, you'll bring your hips up towards your head. Lay on the ground with your arms out to the side and your legs extended. Lift your legs up a few inches up off the ground and begin to curl your legs up by driving your knees towards your head. Be sure to think about rotating your hips to your belly button. Remember that your goal is to crunch the lower portion of your abs. A common mistake is for people to perform a quasi-reverse somersault and throw their legs behind their head. Don't do this. Deliberately push your knees back to curl your hips up off the ground. You want your abs to pull your hips off the ground, not by using momentum. To isolate the lower portion, keep your upper back firm on the floor as the lower end crunches your lower body. Another good alternative is to perform what we call toe-ups. Lift your legs and start pulling your knees towards your head. However, you will then extend your feet up straight into the air and thrust your feet into the sky. Again, your upper back should remain on the ground while the lower half curls up off the ground. Now that your lower abs are done, we will need to hit the upper abs. To do that, we love the McGill Curl Up. Designed by the famed core expert, Dr. Stu McGill, the McGill Curl Up effectively places all of the stress on upper abs while taking away any stress to your back. Now, this is easy to do, but it is quite different than a traditional curl up, so pay attention. First, lay down flat on the floor. Next, place your hands under your lower back. You could also place a towel here. Next, pull one knee up while extending your other leg out. And that's it. Those are the primary differences that make this exercise ideal to train your upper abs. You will now perform a crunch by keeping a straight back and bringing your torso up. And as we promised, we're going to unveil an exclusive exercise just for you. There's a good chance this will be new for you. We first want to tell you what we believe is the single best core exercise, the barbell rollout. Multiple studies have pitted it against other common core exercises to compare the activation they have to all of your core exercises, and the barbell consistently comes out on top. Due to the motion and demand for a rigid core, these are really going to challenge the transverse muscle. Hello, Adonis belt. The problem with performing this exercise at home is, well, it's a barbell rollout. Emphasis on barbell. Now, there are other variations you could perform, but they all require some sort of equipment. Therefore, we're going to show you the walkout. To perform this, you will start in a push-up position. Slowly start to walk your hands out in front of your head. As you do this, maintain a neutral spine. Don't let the spine sag. Keep walking out as far as you can while maintaining good form. You can then walk yourself back to the push-up position. As you progress, you can increase the number of reps, but you can also perform the walkout slower or even pause at the bottom position. Now, before we lay out the workout, we wanted to go over 2 advanced exercises to give you something to work towards. We told you we had the exercise of a famous martial artist. Well, the martial artist is the legendary Bruce Lee, and the exercise is the dragon flag. The dragon flag is a type of human flag that has you support the entire weight of your body on the back of your shoulders. You then let your body hang so that your core must maintain a straight torso. To pull these off, you'll need a crazy strong core. To perform these, you'll need some sort of support that you can hold on to. Lay down with your head near the support and your body laid flat. Reach back and grab the support with your hands. Pull your knees towards your head and then powerfully thrust your feet up into the air to extend your body. You should be inverted with your body weight resting on your upper back and shoulders. Keeping your body more vertical will make the movement easier as there's less force pulling the body down. You can then slowly let your body drop, keeping your legs straight. Try to lower yourself so that your body is at a 45-degree angle and hold. As you're working on those, give your second bonus exercise a shot, an L-sit. L-sits are usually done using parallettes, but you can do them on the floor as well. They're just harder. You could also use some books stacked on one another if you want as well. Anything to get some height. From there, you simply place your hands on the ground or raised surface and support your body. Next, keeping your torso vertical and legs extended, raise your legs off the ground to make a L shape. Don't let the sound of simplicity fool you. These are tough. As you likely won't be able to do one right away, work up to it. Start by just pulling one leg off the ground at a time. From here, progress to pulling both of the ground for short durations. Gradually lengthen the time until you can sit with your torso erect and legs fully extended like Bruce Lee. And now, your workout program. Core mobility, bird dog, 3 sets of 5 to 10 reps per side. Dead bugs, 3 sets of 5 to 10 reps per side. Ab workout, walkout, 5 reps with no pause. Single arm plank, 3 sets of 30 seconds per side. Russian twist, 5 sets of 30 seconds. Reverse crunch, 3 sets of 10 to 15 reps. McGill curl up, 3 sets of 10 to 15 reps. Advanced exercises, dragon flags, 20 to 30 seconds hold. L-sits, 20 to 30 seconds hold. We're going to tell you something that may blow your mind. Ready? Exercise isn't the best way to lose weight.
What?
That's right, exercise is not the best way to lose weight. When you take in all considerations and variables, you actually see that using exercise to burn fat during your weight loss journey will likely yield suboptimal results. In fact, we don't even believe your main reason for exercise should be weight loss. But what are we talking about? This video is going to flip this belief upside down, but trust us, in the end it's all going to make sense. Before we start, realize that this video will be explained as if you're someone who is trying to decide what to do to lose weight. However, the same principles apply to everyone. Let's continue. So tell us, do any of these sound familiar? This program is going to melt fat like butter. Burn 1,000 calories in an hour. The best weight loss program ever. If you've ever been around gyms for any length of time, you've probably heard these, or something similar, many times over. While great marketing tools, none of them are being completely honest. However, most people buy into this as we've been conditioned to equate going to the gym with weight loss. We believe that the main purpose of the gym is to lose weight and burn fat and melt calories and all that. If you were to ask most people why they're going to the gym, it's going to be to lose weight. This is one of the reasons why cardio equipment is the most popular equipment in the gym. However, is this practice steering people down the wrong direction? We think so. We suggest that this mentality could result in disappointment. To be clear, we're not saying the gym won't help you lose weight, or even that it's bad to use the gym to lose weight. We're only saying that there's a better mindset. Again, it'll all make sense at the end. To understand this conundrum, first you need to understand how you lose weight. A very basic explanation is you simply need to burn more calories than you consume. Now, we understand there's plenty of nuance in that statement, and that there certainly are variables that need to be accounted for. However, for the sake of this video, this basic understanding is enough for our situation. So again, to lose weight, you must burn more calories than you consume. This means there are two variables that you can use to control calories: activity and diet. Consuming calories refers to any amount of food you eat. Our diet is composed of 3 macronutrients: protein, fat, and carbohydrates. These are the nutrients that you need to consume in sufficient quantities to support a healthy life. At the same time, these macros are also where you get your calories from. 1 gram of protein has 4 calories, 1 gram of fat has 9 calories, and 1 gram of carbohydrates also has 4 calories. The total amount of these macronutrients that you eat every day will determine your total calorie consumption. Now, burning calories is a bit more complicated, with a few more moving parts to consider. The total amount of calories you burn daily is known as your total daily energy expenditure, or TDEE. To calculate your TDEE, there are 4 different variables to consider. First and largest variable is your basal metabolic rate, or BMR. This is the total amount of calories you need just to support life. The easiest way to think about this is that this is the amount of calories you'd burn if you just laid in your bed completely still all day long, like some of y'all did last Sunday. While we usually associate exercise with calorie loss, in reality every single body process requires energy. This includes brain function, respiration, digestion, your heart pumping, everything. That's what makes this the largest chunk of your calories that you burn daily. Apart from a few extreme athletes, your BMR accounts for 60 to 70% of your TDEE. The second variable is called your thermic effect of food, or TEF. Have you heard the myth that eating celery burns more calories than what's in it? Well, if you have, it's not true, but the gist of it does have some truth to it. TEF is the amount of calories used to digest, absorb, transport, and dispose of food. For example, carbs have a TEF of 10%, meaning that if you eat 100 calories from carbs, your body uses 10 calories to digest, absorb, and transport nutrients. On average, this accounts for 10% of your TDEE. Then we have the third and fourth variables. We'll speak about these together as they have the most variability. Plus, they're the 2 variables you have significant control over. These 2 variables are EAT, exercise activity thermogenesis, and NEAT, non-exercise activity thermogenesis. Together, we could simply call these your activity levels, but they are distinctly different. EAT is the amount of calories you burn through exercise, that is, an activity you choose to perform that's not essential for life but for enjoyment. This is where exercise and the gym fall short. When taking everyone into account, this number can vary quite a bit. For some extreme athletes, it might account for 30 to 40%. However, for most people, this only accounts for 5 to 10%. On the other hand, NEAT refers to all the activities you do that are not for exercise. This includes things like walking through the mall, getting out of bed, brushing your teeth, going to the park to take pictures, or clicking on this video. If you have ever heard of the 10,000 steps, it's really talking about increasing NEAT. Now, most people completely underestimate this low-intensity movement, but it builds up over the day. In fact, on average, NEAT makes up 15% of your TDEE. However, TDEE can vary a lot from person to person. For example, someone working in an office will move around much less than a construction worker. Okay, as we now know what your TDEE is, let's go back to losing weight. So, to lose weight, we would then need to use a formula or a calculator to complete your TDEE. We need to keep in mind your TDEE includes the number of calories you burn from exercise. So basically, if you train 6 times a week, your TDEE will be more than if you train 2 times a week. For example, if you train twice a week, maybe yours is 3,000 calories, while it might be 3,150 if you train 6 times a week. So to lose weight, you must eat less than your TDEE. As you see, training more allows you to eat slightly more and still lose weight, or you could eat the same amount and lose more weight, or a third option. But before we get into that, we need to speak about a topic often lost when discussing weight loss. People will talk about weight loss as if they can burn thousands and thousands of calories daily with no ill effects. This does not happen. In reality, if you go too far into a caloric deficit, you put yourself at risk of losing muscle mass. When going into any deficit, your body is going to need to find energy. Under normal circumstances, your body will simply draw from your fat stores, and that would suffice. However, in a large deficit, your body will really be scavenging for energy, and drawing from your fat stores may not be enough. Therefore, your body will break down muscle so it can use the amino acids for energy. Further, if you go into a large deficit for too long, it can also have some other unintended consequences, such as lowering your metabolism as a means to conserve energy. Therefore, the majority of experts recommend a person get into a slight 300 to 500 caloric deficit daily to see healthy weight loss. This amount will allow steady weight loss while minimizing the risk of any negative effects. Now, these 500 calories can come from either increasing physical activity, cutting out calories, or the third option, cutting out calories and increasing physical activity. This brings us back to our main focus, explaining why exercise is not the best way to lose weight. We need to clarify what we mean, as there are a bit of semantics involved. We're saying that exercise is not the best way. We're not saying exercise doesn't play a part. In fact, it plays a very important part. Numerous studies show that diet plus exercise is better for losing weight compared to just diet alone or just exercise alone. So, it's not that exercise isn't good for losing weight, it's your mindset in the role that exercise plays that's important. Let us explain what we mean. Generally speaking, when people use exercise to lose weight, they'll follow a program that's designed to lose weight. Kind of a no-brainer, right? These programs usually consist solely of cardio, aerobics, possibly HIIT or circuit-style training, if you're lucky. So what's wrong with that? Well, these styles of training are not bad in the least, and we believe everyone's program should include a bit of it all. However, when that's all you do, you waste your gym's primary purpose, which is to build strength and increase muscle mass or maintain muscle mass. As we stated above, you have 2 ways to adjust your calories, by your nutrition and by activity. This means you already have nutrition to cut calories from your diet, and remember, it's only 500. Therefore, you don't really need to use the gym to burn the extra surplus of calories, as that's what your diet should primarily be for. And unlike cutting calories, which can be done with your nutrition, there's no other way to build or maintain muscle if you don't do it at the gym. Remember what we said at the beginning of this video about going into a deficit. Your muscle can break down. In reality, this is always a risk when in a deficit, big or small. However, if you stay in an appropriate deficit and follow a strength and muscle building program at the gym, any muscle loss that may occur will be heavily mitigated. Again, you're unable to do this if you exercise for calorie burn rather than muscle gain. Therefore, instead of going to the gym to burn calories, you should go to the gym to either build muscle or maintain muscle. But with that said, it's also important to realize another factor: you're still going to burn calories by lifting weights. Just because you don't go to the gym specifically to burn calories, it doesn't mean you're not going to burn calories. Of course you are. Now, it's true that you would probably burn more calories by doing cardio for an hour. There are a ton of variables, but 600 calories an hour is a good estimate. So now let's look at weightlifting. Again, a ton of variables, but burning 200 to 300 calories from lifting weights is a pretty good estimate. So obviously there are other ways to burn more calories in the gym. However, this brings us to another extremely important aspect: you can't out-train a bad diet. We're sure you've heard this before, but it needs to be repeated and understood. Think about it. Originally, you became overweight from overeating. In fact, everyone throughout history has become overweight from overeating. This means that your diet is the primary problem. If you burn 500 calories at the gym but then eat an extra slice of pizza because you're a little extra hungry, you just ruined it. Therefore, if you use the gym to lose all your calories, you aren't fixing your real problem, your nutrition. Remember, you will never gain weight from not working out enough. Rather, you always gain weight from eating too much. Weight loss is not a product of how much you train, but how much you eat. Making exercise the main tool ignores this fact. Therefore, if you never get control of your diet, you're always at risk of regaining fat. And many do. And it won't come from not working out enough. Further, you don't want to get in the habit of, quote, burning off a late night. It's not uncommon for people to go to the gym because they ate too much the night before. Therefore, you must control your diet. If you control your diet, you don't need to worry about burning thousands and thousands of calories. Rather, you can concentrate on lifting to maintain your beautiful muscles. During your weight loss journey, you should use the gym to maintain muscle mass and use your nutrition to control your calories. Do you see the subtle difference? It's not saying that you can't use the gym in your weight loss journey. In fact, we strongly recommend that you do. However, burning calories is simply a bonus. It's not its purpose. On the contrary, you use your nutrition to lower your calories. And this concept is true if you're gaining weight, losing weight, or maintaining it. In fact, many high-caliber coaches won't even adjust a program of a long-term client based on if they're gaining or losing weight. Now, this doesn't mean that there won't be any alteration at all. It just means there are not two completely different programs. So now you understand the title of this video. Of course, we think that using exercise in your weight loss journey is a good move. In fact, we think you should, and to prove this, we're going to list just a few awesome benefits you get from lifting weights while losing weight. 1. It may help build muscle if you're new to training. 2. It'll help mitigate muscle loss if you've been training for some time. 3. It'll burn extra calories. 4. It can improve executive function, which can lead to better nutrition choices. 5. It sets you up for a healthy lifestyle. 6. It will increase bone strength. And 7. It can improve your hormone profile. We could keep going, but you get the point. Lifting weights is awesome when used correctly. So this begs the question, how should you lose weight? As mentioned, your training doesn't have to change at all. You could use the same program you used when gaining weight while losing weight. This probably flies in the face of everything you've ever been taught, but it's true. As we just went over in this video, your primary goal when getting to the gym while losing weight is to mitigate muscle loss. While there are admittedly no scientific studies to back this next part up, there's a theory amongst strength coaches that you should primarily use compound movements with heavy loads while losing weight, 85 to 95% of your 1-rep max, or the most you can lift. The reason you do compound movements is threefold. For one, you don't need to worry about isolation exercises as they are predominantly used to build muscle. As you're not necessarily interested in gaining muscle while losing weight, isolations don't have as much of a purpose. To be clear, doing one isolation per joint is always a good idea just to maintain your joint health. You just don't need to do 4 variations of bicep curls in the same session. Secondly, while we literally just had a whole video on why your training shouldn't be designed to burn calories, using compound exercises will burn more calories in the long run. That's why we said secondly, as it's more like a bonus rather than the reason. But still, compound exercises use more muscle mass, which will translate to extra calories burned. The third, and again, while there are no studies to actually back this claim up, there is a theory that heavy compound exercise will better promote the need to maintain muscle. Now, once you get in your heavy lifts, you could end with a circuit or a round or two of HIIT. In fact, you could just perform your isolations in a circuit. Adding a session of HIIT at the end of a session could burn a few extra calories that'll build up over time. However, it should never take precedence over weight training. And of course, remember at the very beginning when we talked about NEAT. Do not underestimate NEAT. Try to make it a point to add some light-intensity walking to your daily life, as this is especially true if you work in an office. Now, this kind of borders on the line of NEAT and EAT, but that's not the point. The point is that adding some light-intensity activity daily will make a huge difference. The more, the better, but try to do at least 30 minutes a day. Or a really easy fix is just ride your bike to the gym. Again, this will increase your calorie burn while allowing you to use the gym for weight training. If anything, realize that you don't always need to ruin yourself to burn calories. Sometimes a 60-minute walk through your local park is all you need. Let's remember that we're only trying to hit a 500-calorie deficit. We're already getting about 200 calories daily from training, so walking an extra 30 to 60 minutes daily gives us an extra 50 to 100 calories. This means now you just need to cut around 200 calories out of your diet. That's like 2 bananas. Easy. Study after study has shown that diet and exercise is always better than either exercise only or diet only. By using both, you now have 2 tools to alter your calories and a tool to maintain your muscle mass. You can then also throw in some light activity for a well-rounded plan. This will maximize the benefits and it'll be your best approach every time. Did you know that you can actually build muscle with just your mind? Or that there's a food that burns calories when you eat it? What about the fact that there's a relationship between your grip strength and your life expectancy? Well, these are just a few of the 50 facts nobody tells you about fitness and building muscle. So pay attention, since we're about to go over some awesome tips for real muscle gains, including our favorite of all time. See if you can guess which one. So let's get right into it. For fact number 1, we're going to start with a big misconception, and that is that building muscle size is not the same as building strength. While a bigger muscle has more potential to be a stronger muscle, these two adaptations occur from completely different physiological processes. Muscle size is actually a change to the architecture of the muscle, while building strength is from an improvement in the neurological system of the existing muscle. Of course, there is a crossover, but if you want to optimize both, you should train for both of them, specifically strength. Why strength? Because of fact number 2. Increasing training volume, or the total amount of weight a muscle lifts, is the primary training variable to increase muscle size, with most recommending moderate loads of 70 to 80% of a 1-rep max for around 8 to 12 reps. But you can use heavier loads, 85% of a 1-rep max or even higher, and studies show that using heavier loads is vastly superior. So if you want to get big, get strong first. But muscles aren't the only thing that gets stronger with resistance training. Fact 3. Lifting weights can also increase your bone strength. When a heavier load is placed on the bone, the excessive weight causes it to bend slightly, causing minor fractures. These fractures are then filled with what are called osteoblasts that trigger new bone growth. To optimize this adaptation, you need to perform heavy load-bearing exercises such as squats and deadlifts. Now, fact number 4 might really surprise you. Did you know that lifting weights can actually increase your flexibility too? Well, as long as you use the full range of motion. From a flexibility perspective, look at the movements you perform under load. Deep squats, overhead pressing, lunges. These movements require mobility in the hips, ankles, and shoulders. This doesn't mean you don't need any other flexibility or mobility training, but you can rest assured that resistance training with a full range of motion isn't going to impede your flexibility and will likely improve it. However, you need to be careful about your flexibility because, fact number 5, too much flexibility can actually decrease performance and be just as dangerous as not being flexible enough. And increasing flexibility too much will actually decrease the stability of a joint. It sounds crazy based on what we just looked at, but stay with us. If involved in impact sports or situations in which the joint experiences a high amount of force, the lack of stability in the joint may result in injury. So, what to do? Well, simply keep your flexibility in line for your lifestyle. Now let's get back to building muscle with number 6. Unfortunately, we need to tell you that building muscle gets progressively harder the longer you train. Everyone loves beginner gains, which refer to when a person starts lifting and gains muscle fast and easy. That's the fun period, but the bad thing is that if gaining muscle is easy when you start, that means it gets harder later on. While you might put on 20 pounds in your first year, you'll be happy to get 5 pounds in your 3rd and 4th years. But here's the good news with fact number 7. Once you gain muscle, keeping it is relatively easy. A big review from 2021 found that the minimum threshold to maintain muscle mass is surprisingly small. Training each muscle group once a week with 1 set to failure will maintain your muscle mass for a total of 32 weeks. To be clear, that means that you can perform 1 set of bench presses, 1 set of bent over rows, 1 set of military presses, 1 set of squats, and 1 set of deadlifts once a week and be good for 32 weeks. Now, in order to get this muscle, you need to pay attention to this next fact. It is literally the most important principle in lifting. Fact number 8. You must apply the principle of progressive overload. The simple explanation is you need to do more work than the week before. Sounds easy, but many lifters mess this up and think that simply training hard is all they need to do. Absolutely, you need to train hard, but this must include more weight or more reps and sets. You're basically convincing your body it needs more muscle to survive. This is why tracking your program is so important. Later on, we'll tell you the absolute easiest variable to manipulate to apply progressive overload. But first, we have fact number 9, which is that program jumping will be your demise. As you begin your lifting journey, you'll come across dozens and dozens of programs, all claiming to be the best. You'll have to wait and learn later which program is really the best one, but for now, what you need to know is that you don't want to jump programs. This refers to following a program for a couple of weeks, then seeing a cooler one and jumping over to it. To see progress, you must follow a plan and apply progressive overload for muscle growth, not hop from one routine to the next routine. Your body simply cannot adapt overnight. Now, in order to optimize for muscle growth, you need to understand fact number 10, which is that your muscle doesn't grow evenly. Your muscle is not one solid piece of tissue. In reality, it's composed of individual fibers. Further, a muscle can have several heads. This is where different attachment points merge together to form one muscle belly. So here's the thing. Recent research has shown that if you perform a single exercise, your muscle will experience different amounts of growth in different areas. This can happen throughout the muscle, even on the same head, and even in a single muscle fiber. This uneven growth brings us to number 11, which is that you need to implement a variety of exercises that use different biomechanics and angles to train the same muscle group. While this has been a common practice in the gym for quite some time, we now have studies to back up that practice. For example, to hit the chest, use flat barbell bench press, incline dumbbell press, dips, and cable fly. 4 chest exercises with 4 different movement patterns means optimal growth. On the other hand, fact number 12 tells us that bro splits are likely suboptimal for muscle growth. Now, of course, they will work, at least if you can apply progressive overload. However, studies have shown that instead of training a muscle once a week, training it twice a week may lead to better results. For example, instead of using 6 exercises to train a muscle in a single session, you should train a muscle 2 times a week using 3 exercises in each session. This results in more accumulation of higher quality volume. While we all want more muscles for aesthetics, there is another even more important reason to accumulate muscle mass. Fact number 13. Your muscle mass index, or MMI, can determine your longevity. Your muscle mass index is the relationship between your height and the total amount of muscle mass you hold. Longer-term studies have been conducted which tracked the health of older populations for 15 to 16 years. A direct relationship was found between their MMI and longevity. In other words, those who held more muscle mass lived longer. This is why it's important to have a long life habit of resistance training to always have adequate amounts of muscle mass. Still, even if you're older and have never trained, it's not too late to start. That's because of our 14th fact, which is that the elderly can still also gain muscle. There's a common misconception that we can only build muscle during our younger years, and that our only hope as we age is to hold on to as much muscle as possible. Now, there's a ton of nuance in this belief, but it's wrong. While it might be easier to grow muscle during your younger years, the truth is you can put on muscle mass at just about any age. Depending on your current fitness level, research has shown it is possible to gain muscle well into your older years. How old? Well, this review saw greater increases of muscle mass from 1.5% to a staggering 15.6% in individuals who were 75 years and older. So you're truly never too old to start. But regardless of your age, you need to be aware of fact 15. Drinking alcohol is doing you no favors. Sorry for being a buzzkill, pun intended. In fact, it's hurting your progress from multiple angles. For one, it activates your AGRP neurons. These are your starvation neurons, which trigger a stronger appetite. Secondly, it disturbs your sleep, which decreases recovery, decreases testosterone, and promotes a catabolic environment. And third and fourth, it disrupts muscle protein synthesis and delays recovery. You can still build muscle by drinking moderately, but it's going to be blunted, so it's up to you to weigh if it's worth it. Now, even if you do choose to partake once in a while, you still need to practice fact number 16. Warm-ups are vital to optimize performance. We can often brush off warm-ups as they're just a mere formality, something we do because we're supposed to do it. Other people see warm-ups as just a means to prevent injury. In reality, one of the primary benefits of a proper warm-up is improved performance in the gym. This is especially true with warm-up sets, which were found to increase the amount that could be lifted during working sets. So spend the extra 10 to 15 minutes to properly warm up. Some other ideas that are outdated? How about number 17, taking ice baths after workouts? Ice baths have made a huge impact on the fitness industry in the past few years. Everywhere you look on social media, you see them. However, while it does have some benefits for recovery and muscle soreness, it gets sketchy when it comes to muscle growth, and research has shown it can actually inhibit both muscle growth and strength gains. This may be confusing, but you must understand that while related, recovery and muscle growth are two separate processes. While researchers aren't positive why this occurs, they believe it has something to do with an ice bath decreasing inflammation, which would usually trigger an anabolic response. We hope we're not bursting your bubble with these last couple, but we have another one you need to know. Fact number 18. The keto diet is not good for muscle growth. The keto diet is another practice that's gained a lot of popularity as of late. However, studies show it seems to hinder your ability to build muscle. That doesn't mean it's impossible to gain muscle on a keto diet, but studies show it is significantly more difficult. Now, to be clear, as the keto diet enhances your body's ability to utilize fat for energy, it might actually hold extra benefits to preserve muscle while in a caloric deficit. However, if building muscle is an important goal, you might want to save keto until you reach your desired amount of muscle mass. For number 19, while we're talking about misconceptions, let's talk about how muscle confusion is not a thing. Muscle confusion became popular years ago with the training program P90X. The idea is that in order to optimize muscle growth, you must, quote, trick your muscles and train it with random exercises on a daily basis. Well, remember fact 8 about progressive overload. In order to apply progressive overload, there needs to be structure to your program so that you can utilize an exercise for a minimal amount of time, which is generally 4 weeks. However, that doesn't mean you never switch exercises. Just don't do it every session. Instead, follow fact number 20 and switch exercises every 4 to 8 weeks. That is, as long as muscle hypertrophy is your primary goal. After you train for a period, you'll find these exercises become stagnant and your progress will start to slow. At this time, you can swap out your exercise with ones that have similar biomechanics. Swap the barbell bench press for flat bench dumbbell press or bent over rows with the T-bar row. For number 21, we're going to get psychic. Well, kind of, because you can build muscle with your mind. Now, you can't merely wish muscles into existence. However, you can actively contract your muscle with intentional focus, which is able to induce muscle growth. For example, a study had participants perform a movement while also visualizing in their minds that they were performing that same movement. The twist? They didn't actually have anything in their hands. They were pretending. However, they found that even with no weight, just visualizing caused an increase in muscle growth. This is also one of the mechanisms behind our next fact. Fact number 22 is that building a mind-muscle connection actually works. Emerging studies have shown that focusing on the intended muscle while training can lead to higher activation in muscle growth. It's basically an easy hack that lets you build more muscle without actually doing more work. Here's another useful tip for fact 23. Training with a partner will likely lead to better gains. That's right, if you're like most people, you probably will see better results lifting with someone, since studies show that supervised training likely results in more muscle growth and strength gains. Inexperienced lifters may just need the guidance of a trainer as they don't understand how much they can lift. On the other hand, experienced lifters might just push more due to the competition aspect or the extra motivation from a friend being present. With that said, you and your lifting partner may see different results due to the next fact. Fact number 24 is that genetics will play a role in your progress. Sure, some people will use genetics as an excuse to not try and get in shape, and while for many, that's all it is, an excuse. However, truth is that genetics do play a role in your ability to progress and even dictate your top physique that can be reached. For example, your bone structure can determine how much muscle you can carry. The insertion of a muscle can alter the shape and perceived size of that muscle. There's even certain genes that make it easier to gain muscle compared to other people. The point being that two people who put in the same effort in the gym can have different results. This just means to focus on yourself and don't always compare yourself to others. Another example of how genetics play a role in lifting is found at fact number 25. Your limbs can dictate what exercises you perform. For example, individuals with long legs and short torsos are better suited for the sumo deadlift. On the contrary, those with short legs generally do better with conventional ones. This is also why your perfect form for certain exercises will look different from another person's. Fact number 26 is very important, at least if you want to have a functional core, and that your core's primary job is not to perform crunches. The best way to train a muscle is to look at its function. With that in mind, how often do you walk around while crunching over repeatedly? The answer is you don't. Rather, you stand straight and tall, This is because your abs are built to stiffen your core in an isometric fashion to prevent movement of the spine. For example, if you are suddenly jerked, your abs stiffen to prevent shock to your spine. Performance-wise, they stiffen so that you can generate power by rotating at the hips, such as when swinging a baseball bat. With that said, include anti-rotation exercises in your program, such as the pull-off press, wood chops, and suitcase carries. Speaking of your abs, we need to talk about number 27. Your core includes your abs, but it's not only your abs. When people hear core, they think abs. And the core does include the abs, but it also includes your erector spinae, or your lower back. Some go as far to say the core even includes the entire torso. Regardless, when you do core training, be sure you're training your lower back as well, or you might suffer from a muscle imbalance. The good thing is anti-rotation exercises work well, but also include some movements such as back extensions. For fact number 28, we're going to talk about grip, specifically the fact that it's another great indicator of mortality. Out of all training goals, increasing grip strength is rarely at the top of anyone's priority list in the fitness community. However, it's becoming a critical measurement in the healthcare industry, and for good reason. More and more studies are finding that your grip strength is an effective indicator of your mortality. In fact, an inverse relationship has been found with your grip strength and all-cause mortality, as well as cause-specific mortality. This includes cancer and cardiovascular disease. You might think this is because sick people are weak and lose their grip strength, but interestingly, there even seems to be a dose-response relationship, which means that a stronger grip also equals a longer life. But there's another reason to increase your grip too: elbow pain. Fact number 29 is that weak forearm muscles are a major cause of elbow pain. Now, there are quite a few different causes of elbow pain, but one of the most common ones is a condition called lateral epicondylalgia, better known as tennis elbow. Tennis elbow is caused by inflammation of the extensor carpi radialis, one of the extensor muscles located on the anterior of your forearm. The inflammation occurs at the origin located at the elbow, which generally results from overuse, either from prolonged or repeated gripping movements. The good thing is that fixing this is easy. Just be sure to include grip-specific exercises in your training, such as one of our favorites, farmer walks. For the next few facts, let's dismantle some more misconceptions and popular sayings. First up is fact number 30, abs are not made in the kitchen. Abs are made in the kitchen is a tired gimmick that aims to emphasize the importance of nutrition in achieving a six-pack. However, it's not really true. Your abs are muscles which grow in the same manner as every other muscle by applying progressive overload. If not, you'll never see abs regardless of how skinny you are, as they'll be too small. Therefore, your abs are made in the gym, and you see them by what you do in the kitchen. This runs together with fact 31, the saying nutrition is 80% of your success and the gym is 20. Wrong. If your nutrition is on point but your training is all over the place, you won't make the progress you want. At the same time, if your training is dialed in but your nutrition is all over the place, you're also not going to see the results you want. Don't pit these two against each other as if it's competition. In fact, they work together, so give both 100% of your effort. Fact number 32 is going to take this one step further. Sleep and recovery are just as important as your training and nutrition. Your sleep and recovery can both have a dramatic effect on your overall progress, and skimping on either will make a serious dent in your progress. Skimping on sleep can mess up your hormones and make it easier to gain fat yet harder to lose muscle. On the other hand, not allowing full recovery will consistently break your body down, making it impossible to progress. On that note, fact number 33, you can make gains without pain. While there are times that training will be uncomfortable, it is not the ultimate goal. As we've mentioned with progressive overload, your goal is to do more work than you did before. This will sometimes be accompanied with soreness and sometimes not. Not, quote, feeling it has little to no effect on the effectiveness of your session. As long as you successfully accomplish progressive overload, you're going to grow. Do not chase soreness. Fact number 34, a calorie is an oversimplification. While it's a pretty good summary of what you need to do to lose weight, it implies that all calories are created equal. This isn't exactly true, as the source matters. For example, the thermal effect of food, or TEF, is the amount of calories required to digest and absorb a food. Fat has a very low TEF, 0 to 3%, while protein has a TEF of 20 to 30%. On the other hand, you need to be concerned with your macronutrients and your micronutrients. Therefore, pay attention to your calories and the quality of your diet. It's not just about calories. So, what should you eat? Well, fact number 35, is that the best diet in the world is, drumroll please, the one you can adhere to. That might not be the answer you're looking for, but studies have shown that no diet has a significant advantage in the long term. And the one factor that did dictate better success was simply one that a person could adhere to. Any diet that can help you control your calories will work. Therefore, you should simply follow what you can stick with, and rest assured you don't need to try other diets. For fact number 36, we want to talk about supplements. Simply put, most of them are a waste of money. The supplements industry's main goal is to make money, which leads to claims of instant gains and melting fat. Unfortunately, this doesn't happen for most in the real world. Remember, supplements are supplementary to your diet. Stop putting so much emphasis on them when your diet is far from sufficient. With that said, fact number 37 is going to save you money, since here are the supplements that studies say might actually be worth it. Protein powder is a simple, cheap way to get protein, so it's definitely worth your money if you need help eating enough. After protein powder, creatine is the most studied and effective supplement on the market. Plus, it's also cheap. If you're not taking creatine, then you're doing it wrong. Third, caffeine is the most effective ingredient in pre-workouts. Therefore, caffeine pills are a very cheap way to get caffeine. And the last two are a maybe, beta-alanine and EAA. You probably don't need it, but it might help. Anything else? Not worth your time. Next question. Have you jumped on the fasted training bandwagon yet? Well, you want to pay attention to fact number 38. Fasted training is not necessarily better for losing weight. Again, fasted training is when you exercise in a fasted state, meaning you haven't eaten for at least 8 hours. It's claimed that this will burn more fat. In some sense, this is true, as your body can become more fat adapted, meaning it can burn fat for fuel easier. However, assuming you eat the same amount of calories, studies have shown it's no better than training in a fed state. This is because your body will still burn the same amount of calories, whether it comes from fat or carbs. Burning fat is not the same as losing fat. With that said, training fasted could actually spell trouble for something else. Fact number 39 is that training fasted could actually mitigate strength gains. Due to the nutritional restraints, training fasted hinders an athlete from consuming protein and carbohydrate around training. Therefore, if you perform some sort of a fasting diet, always train during your feeding window as opposed to the fasting period. We made it to fact number 40. Let's look at another false belief, the post-workout window. The claim is that your body is in an increased anabolic state, so you must eat within 30 minutes of training to capitalize on this. While it is true that training increases muscle protein synthesis, its spike lasts longer than 30 minutes. In fact, as long as you're eating protein every 3 to 4 hours, the need for a post-workout meal is greatly mitigated. The only time it's important is if you train fasted. So while it's a good idea to eat at some point after training, there's no need to stress about it. Let's take fact number 41 to get serious for a sec. While it's great for your health, the reality is that lifting weights can sometimes have a negative effect on your mental health and cause body dysmorphia. Of course, gym life is an awesome habit with a ton of benefits. However, if you're not careful, it can also give rise to some mental disorders. Body dysmorphia can occur in gym goers in the form of muscle dysmorphia. This is when obviously fit people can't see the incredible progress they've made and still think they're too small or not lean enough, and often resort to harmful practices or obsess over it. Be mindful of this and keep reasonable goals in mind. And most of all, be proud of the progress you make. Now, fact number 42 might be a hard pill to swallow for some, but it's a fact of life that you will naturally lose muscle as you age. This natural process is called sarcopenia, and it begins to become especially noticeable after age 50. And this process can increase rapidly in individuals who aren't involved in physical activity. But at the same time, individuals involved in resistance training can fend off detrimental effects until much later. This is yet one more reason for a lifelong habit of training. Don't stop lifting. Something else you can do for your muscles? Fact number 43. Eat the entire egg. A famous study from 2021 showed that by eating a whole egg after resistance training, rather than just the egg white, you can actually increase muscle growth. This includes increases in strength and hypertrophy. This simple hack is believed to be due to the added cholesterol, one of the requirements for production of testosterone. Next, fact number 44. The number one variable for muscle hypertrophy. At the beginning of this video, we talked about progressive overload and mentioned we were going to tell you the #1 variable, and here it is. It's volume. We mentioned this briefly, but it's so important we thought it deserves its own fact. Increasing your volume has been found to be the #1 factor that dictates muscle growth. For those unaware, volume refers to the amount of work placed on a muscle, such as load times reps times sets. The easiest way to increase volume is to increase load, but you can also add reps or sets. If you apply progressive overload by increasing your volume, you will grow. Fact number 45. Now this is another really important one, so pay attention. The gym is to build or maintain muscle, while nutrition controls our weight. What this means is that your main priority while choosing a resistance training program should not be based on how many calories are burned, but rather how well it can build or preserve muscle. This is because nutrition is by far the best and easiest way to control your diet. Of course, training is going to burn calories. However, we want to use it to improve our musculature, as this is its primary purpose. Fact number 46. Our body is optimized when thought of as a machine. This is probably our favorite fact on the whole list, and it applies to almost everything. You wouldn't put dirty fuel in your car, so why would you do the same to your body? Focus on eating good nutrition. You also wouldn't redline your car consistently, nor let it idle all night. Do the same for your body and allow it to stop and rest once in a while so it doesn't break down. The fact is, your body is the most sophisticated machine we know of, and treating it like one will yield the greatest results. But perhaps our second favorite fact is fact 47. Focus on the basics, as they're responsible for the majority of your gains. Of course, we love learning and implementing new exercises. However, we know that they always come second to the basics. By basics, we mean your big compound movements, such as the squat, bench press, deadlift, rows, and overhead pressing. Also, some bodyweight movements such as dips, push-ups, pull-ups, and chin-ups. Building off that, for fact number 48, progressing in the gym is simple. Concentrate on the basics, apply progressive overload, and eat right. This is all the base of successful lifters. Getting caught up in other nuances is likely just going to stall your progress. Speaking of nuance, as we're almost done, we're going to combine 3 questions for fact number 49. Should you perform HIIT or LISS? HIIT stands for high-intensity interval training, which consists of alternating between periods of work and short periods of recovery. On the contrary, LISS stands for low-intensity steady state. It consists of working at a low pace for an extended period of time. For example, going on a slow jog for 45 minutes. It's long been debated as to which of the two is better. However, they're not the only ones. For example, other common exercises pitted against each other are pull-ups or chin-ups. Which one should you do? What about sumo versus conventional deadlift? The answer to all these questions: just do it all. There are so many examples where exercises and training methods are pitted against each other as if you can only choose one. The truth is that they all have their own benefits and train different muscle groups or physiological systems. For example, we know that HIIT and LISS both burn similar amounts of fat and both increase VO2 max. However, HIIT trains your anaerobic systems, where LISS trains your aerobic systems. Whenever you come across one of these and don't know which to choose, just include both. And since we've already talked about the best diet, for our last fact, number 50, we're going to talk about the best program. Just like with your diet, the answer is whatever you can stick to. A lifelong habit of fitness is always going to provide the best benefits. Sure, there may be some programs that put on more muscle or strength in the short term, but the ultimate goal is to live longer and live healthier, giving you more and more time to get fit or big or whatever your goal is. And that's simply done by being active your whole life. And there it is. As we went through, we hope you caught on to our main point. Lifting weights is one of the healthiest activities you can get involved in, and it doesn't need to be complicated. Just like fact number 47 said, concentrate on the basics, apply progressive overload, and watch your nutrition. At the same time, there's a lot of knowledge you can gain along the way, and we hope you did.